Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. Sorry if my voice is a bit funny at the moment. My throat's gone a bit weird recently. I'm completely fine, it's just when it happens, so sorry if my voice is somewhat different. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want early access to my videos and my podcast in the description below. I have a quick message before the video starts, so if you'd like to go straight to them, then there's timestamps in the description. So for today I'd like to share this. I think something people often overlook, regardless of what they're doing, is becoming burnt out. And it's something that can actually be quite detrimental to your mental health and kind of makes your natural mental barriers come down a bit. And this can make us more susceptible to negative emotions and feelings and thinking patterns, I believe. I think it's really important to try and just pick up on the signs of it, because of course you don't want to get to the point where you're really down and in a bad way. So a good way to prevent it is to try and pick up on when you're a bit burnt out. And some of the signs I've realized is that you might not really feel as interested in doing things, and everything might become a challenge, even if it's the smallest little things. And this could just be natural from having a worse day if you're susceptible to depression or things like that, or naturally more anxious. But if you find it persists and that you really have no motivation for things and don't really enjoy things, then it might be a sign that you're becoming burnt out. So make sure you schedule some days off where you can just rest and relax and enjoy yourself and just do the things that you want to do and not have to worry about other things. It's something that's very important, I think, to have the balance in your life, and I think people don't appreciate the importance of having actual dedicated rest days. Even just time off from training or things like that I think can be really important, and you truly do need that balance in order to be the best in life. And remember, it's important just to enjoy life and the things that you like, but not push yourself too hard all the time. So I hope that can make a difference for someone, and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. I'm a park ranger during the daytime, but in my off times I'm an avid hunter and love to go exploring and camping. I was on one particular trip in Alaska that was like no other. I'd gone to one particular area that I love to go fishing in a number of times, and I was planning on spending the week up in an isolated cabin. Now, to get to the cabin you actually had to walk or really trek for miles and miles in snowshoes. During such, it was quite bright during the day and could actually get quite hot, so I had to wear some sunglasses just to stop my eyes burning from the light reflecting. I also brought lots of water because I'd get lots of headaches otherwise. Anyway, the first couple of days on the trip go perfectly normal and I'm having a great time there. Now, when I set in for the third night, I'm awoken by a loud knocking on the door. I think this is really odd because literally no one's out here. Now, I know something's wrong and I go to investigate. I can see quite clearly out of the windows and I don't see anyone at all. Strangely, this made me feel very calm and a little bit slow, if that makes sense. Kind of reminded me of how far away I am from everyone else. I don't think much of it and decide that I need to go back to bed. I do so, and all is normal. I'm now coming into the fourth night. I'm heading back from another fishing trip and I feel pretty calm and relaxed. I'm actually very peaceful at this particular moment and happy to be going back and starting my meal. I'm going to be eating one of the fish that I've captured and I think this is really cool. As I'm doing so, I can hear a loud knock on the door once again. Confused, I go out and grab my knife and go to open the door. I open the door and find no one. But just off, over in the horizon, I can see a tall figure standing there looming. It's very shadowy and hard to see because some snow's picked up, but this is weird. I shout out, "Hey, do you need help?" And the only way I can describe this is that it seemingly melts into the floor. Not like it walks off, it just seems to slowly go down to where I can't see it. I call out to this person again or whatever it is, and again get no reply. The silence becomes deafening and I'm struck with fear now. Then something else is odd. I can't really see any tracks around. I decide to close the door and quickly go out to try and help in case somebody's lost. I realise that it's not likely and improbable, but I guess that's from being a ranger that makes you want to go and investigate and try and help. I head over quickly to the exact spot where this person appeared to be, but I can't find anything. Surely the isolation has really started to get to me. I decide the best thing I can do now is just head back and try and think of home. Now, I've really struggled to fall asleep at night and I've truly tried my best, but something just felt completely off about this encounter. Now, in the early hours of the 5th day, I'm woken up again by a strange knocking. I'm actually pretty irritated and I grab the knife and repeat the procedure. Just as I'm one step from opening the door handle, I hear knocking again on the opposite side of the cabin. Now, I know I'm alone out here and nobody should be around me, and I can feel the muscles becoming tight on my back, like my body's getting prepared for something to come and attack me. I can actually feel my blood pulsating a little bit, which isn't a nice feeling, and it travels up to the top of my neck and my arms. You know when you just get into a heightened state, almost like you know something's there and you're trying your best to stay calm. I then go to investigate the other side of the cabin, and I can't get rid of this strange warm feeling on my body. I go to shout but quickly stop myself, realizing silence is the best thing now and I really need to be observant to figure out what the heck is going on. And immediately it stops. I then hear it from the other side of the cabin and realize something's wrong. Suddenly the wind's picked up and there's knocking on all sides of the cabin. It sounded like lots of people throwing hard cups at the sides of the cabin constantly, and I almost feel like the whole thing's gonna come down. I go back and sit in the middle of the bed with the knife drawn, not knowing what to do. I can just about see out the windows and no one's there. I ended up covering my ears, closing my eyes, waiting for it to stop. And suddenly it does, almost like I've willed it away. I become very angry suddenly and don't want to be scared and quickly throw the door open and scream, "Hey, whoever's there needs to stop." I rush outside with the knife, ready to have a big fight to the death with God knows what, but there's nothing there. I quickly sprint to one side of the cabin and I find nothing. I then trace my steps and run in a circle and I can't find anything. I then look up expecting to see some kind of rock or at least snow in the ground from where somebody's threw stuff like ice or whatever at the cabin, but there's nothing. Then I can see it. There's tracks leading up to the front of the cabin. Yes, I've got them. I'm very angry and with the adrenaline surging in my body, I sprint towards the tracks, running in the direction that I saw the figure yesterday. I follow these for a good minute until suddenly they stop. The steps completely vanish out of nowhere. I look to the left and right and can't see any tracks whatsoever. I then look around and I can't find anyone. This is very bizarre because I know for a fact that I should have encountered somebody by now. Even if it's just an animal, there should be something, but there's nothing. I start to grow more and more irritated until I take a closer inspection of the tracks. They kind of look almost too big to be a person's, but clearly not a bear because there's not any paw prints. I take a while to try and figure out what these are, but I really can't. They're basically large masses in the snow with kind of points at the end. But clearly it's not a hoof, but God knows what it is. I realise now that I should really cut the trip short, but I don't have a choice other than to go and sleep for a bit, then continue in the morning home. And I don't want to get a reputation for being somebody who's scared of things that might not even be there. So I sprint back into the cabin, I barricade the door and bedroom and fall asleep again. I wake up in the morning and everything seems to be normal. And for the first few minutes, I actually forget about what's happened and I go about my way. It's only when I pack up and start heading out that I realize what happened was really bizarre. I have everything together and I can't see the tracks from before now because more snow is set, only my own new ones. I go to take a look at the cabin and I can just about make out a figure again, this time just off to the side of the cabin, just like before. Just before fear sets in, I noticed another one to the side of it, then one other just to the right and in the far distance, almost filming a circle around the cabin. I realize something's very off and I grip my knife very tightly. I sprint hike basically the whole way back to where my truck is, and I then start the long drive back home. Even in this very moment now where I'm writing up my experience for you all, I still don't know what happened that day. It did put me off doing any kind of hiking or exploring or going out to cabins, though I have since returned to camping trips with groups of friends, but I've never went out alone again and I don't think I ever will. I'm certainly never going back to that cabin. My mum has many interesting stories about the little house she raised her half-sister in back in the 90s, but this one has definitely puzzled me. She said it was around the same time she met my dad, and like any other summer night, they usually kept the windows open for air. They had one big window in the living room facing the front yard outside. She said my dad had heard something in the bushes that sit right under the window. They both looked in that direction, but the living room lights are on, so you can't really see the screen. She said it got pretty loud and eventually made out a flapping sound, maybe a bird. But the sound got a lot heavier, like there was something huge trying to fly away. She said they could both hear thick wings like a bat, but can't see anything. They're both too scared to turn the light or go outside, but it eventually stopped. Never heard anything like it since. They live/still live in the Indiana area, so there aren't many huge birds or animals up there that could have made it. A bit Pacific and eerie to make up, I think, but very weird. Our home sits on the edge of 200 acres of woods with well-established trails running through. I've been exploring back there for 6 years now and know the trails very well. Yesterday, early in the evening, I went back with my dog and headed down with our most well-travelled path. There was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. I was just watching the deer and eating wild blackberries. This is something I've done before. I come to a familiar clearing where some equipment owned by the gas company is, and I suddenly felt disorientated, almost dizzy. I was just standing there looking around at the clearing and the trails, which look both familiar and strange simultaneously. Then I noticed what appears to be a house down the trail to my left. There shouldn't be any houses there and I felt scared. But I walked that way anyway. I know, not smart. I got down the trail and realized it was my son's elementary school, which does border the woods but not on the side and not where I am. I was genuinely scared at this point and kept looking around, wondering what the hell happened. How did I get so disorientated and manage to turn around so quick? I got home fine and nothing else really scary happened, but I just cannot wrap my mind around what happened. In January of 2020, my brother, fiance, kid and I decided to go backpacking in southern Indiana. We stayed at a shelter that is close to the Ohio River. At about 1 p.m, my brother and my kid were asleep and my fiance and I were out by the fire just talking. My fiance got scared and pointed to multiple lights in the woods. It looked as though there's 5 to 10 people out there with flashlights coming towards us. I go and get my brother up so he can see and get his gun if needed, but before I get him up, one by one, the lights started to disappear. We spoke with him about it the following morning, and he said it was probably just lights from the boats and reflections. Then the next night, we waited for boats to pass by again, and none of them made the same light as the one before. And we knew we saw the lights then, and it seemed too far away from the river to be redirected into the woods or to reflect like that. Then, around 5 or 5:30 in the morning of the third day, while I was laying there in the shelter and everyone else was asleep, I was awoken by the sound of people whispering. Then I saw a shadow or something through the cracks of the shelter. I poked my head around expecting to see someone, but literally no one was there. We've been back to that exact spot multiple times since and haven't experienced anything like it since. I used to live in Wells, Nevada, a tiny town, really. The only thing to do is go backpacking and hunt most of the time. It was usually great, however, one particular trip stands out to me. I was a naught but a wee lad, at the tender age of 14 when my father decides to take me on a trip to Jarbridge. It's an absolutely beautiful area and the trip is absolutely stunning, with lots of abandoned buildings to check out and things to explore. Tons of stuff to do. Anyhow, we drove out and decided to explore this building that obviously has been abandoned long ago. I had a 12 gauge with me as well as my 44 strapped to my hip. Just because I'm from a gun savvy family, I suppose. This is important for the next part. We walk up to the door to the place where I heard something incredibly odd. It sounded like somebody was sawing on something like a piece of wood. I tugged at my dad and told him what I heard, but he just shrugs it off. Just after I told him, a voice came from inside telling us to come in. It was obviously from an older gentleman, but nevertheless made us jump. My father is extremely outgoing, however, and decides to go in despite my repeated attempts at doing the exact opposite. So when we went in, the first thing the man says is, "You ain't gonna shoot me with that, are you now, son?" I quickly shook my head no and gave a gentle laugh. I thought he was joking. My father introduces himself and I, as well as my younger brother. The man then introduces himself. He immediately says he's 127 but couldn't have been more than 80, and that he'd been raised around here, which is as follows, and I can remember roughly how the conversation went, saying, "Well, I was born here in this hometown with my siblings, because my father had gone out and froze himself to death in the harsh winters we got around here. It ain't that long after I was born, I followed in his footsteps and tried crawling out into the snow. I about froze to death, but Ma saved me by finding me out there in the snow, dragging me inside, but she froze to death herself doing it. Did you bring any potatoes? I'll tell ya. I was in Ireland during the famine. I could really use some potatoes. In fact, my cousin served in World War II but was killed and reincarnated as my brother. Anyway, I used to work down in Las Vegas. I built over 1,000 motels and homes. I built this place here too, actually. I also helped build the Notre Dame, as I'm very religious, but god damn it, somebody stole the doors right off the place." Now at this point, as he looked at me and said again, "Are you gonna shoot me, boy?" I said no, and put my gun near the door to put him at ease. At this point, I can see behind him, and I can see a table that's laid out with perfect china and proper silverware for 4, the exact number of us there. I returned to my seat, had an incredibly uneasy feeling I've never felt before or since, because it was disturbing. I started telling my dad that we had to go, but before I could finish, we heard the sound of tires coming down the road. The old man leapt to his feet, immediately disturbed. "What? Who? Why is someone here? No one's supposed to be here." He began walking towards the door, which is where I'd set my shotgun down. My dad also jumped up and we quickly left. I'd never felt so disturbed in my life. We let the other folks who'd pulled up to the property know about it, saying it's really not wise to go in there. And we jumped in the truck and left. When we got home, of course, I told everyone about it. A buddy did a bit of research and I found out that Pruti's where a local family came with a long history of having issues, and this person was real, but however, had an obituary from 5 years prior to us meeting him. Now I don't know if it was the same individual, but my god was it scary. The weirdest one that I had was while hiking with my brother, and we stumbled upon a grow up on the side of a hill in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't too far from a small community, but it was a few miles up a steep creek bed. We had taken a rugged logging road to get there and then hiked along a very rough trail we found. There was probably 50 very healthy marijuana plants there. It was on crown public land, so we weren't allowed to hike there, but we sure didn't hang around to find out whose it was. Another time we're hiking to the top of a mountain, looking for interesting rocks. The mountains were known to the local natives as a spiritual site, and there was definitely the sense of otherworldliness in the air. Now evening was coming, so we were heading back to my car. We found a car inn made of rocks balanced together. As we started to approach it, there was something bright orange in the space formed between the leaning rocks, right in the center of the configuration. It looked like something man-made and was jarringly out of place in this very isolated setting. When we got near it, we realized the bright orange was the last tiny drop of sunlight. Literally everywhere else is shadowy, that had somehow fallen right into the center of it for us to find out. It was bright orange because it was late summer and there was lots of wildfires in the area. Of course it was just a coincidence, but it seems like more than that. And this reminds me of another one. We were driving down to a remote mountain road after a day of fishing. It was dark and suddenly we come across a mysterious cloud of smoke enveloping the road. We couldn't see the source of it and we were at least 15 miles away from any houses. We stopped the car, and when we walked back up to the road we could see a bit, and about 50 feet from the road in a little gully there's a wildfire burning. It was about 10 feet by 10 feet and warm enough that we could feel it from the road. The creepy part about that is that when we drove up that road earlier in the day to get to the lake, we noticed a faint smoky smell. It must have been sparked by some lightning there and was slowly growing and absolutely become massive. This was a remote road and we had not found it before. We just know the fire must have got huge, but we did report it. Okay, I've got one for you all. I live in a rural area about 30 minutes of West Palm Spring in Southern California. My cousin and I decided to go hiking some hills that are about 20 minutes north in an area called Oakland. There was no trail to get back into the hills, and we actually had to trespass on a fire camp and follow a stream up towards the hills. We started climbing the hills and reached the peak of a very steep area. I realized we're way away from where the car park is, and I don't even know where the road is. On top of that, all the fog is heavily rolling in now, and we only have about 35 minutes of light remaining. We attempt to take a shortcut down the hill by sliding on our butts down a steep slope. To add dismay, we ended up on the side of a 30 feet rock wall. Long story short, we managed to scale down the rock, but not before a football-sized rock falls on my cousin's head, and he starts bleeding heavily and is disorientated. We start walking the direction that the car's in, with the fog still heavy around us. Now we're not sure if we're going the right way, and my cousin is bleeding a lot, and suddenly we come across a 40-foot building with thick concrete walls, set mostly below ground like a bunker, in the middle of a forest. Now the windows had bars on them, and the door is heavy sealed. My cousin wanted to check it out, but we're getting a bad vibe from it. He was saying something was drawing him into it. Now I don't believe in the supernatural, but I would not let him in. It's a really eerie place. Shortly after we pass the house, and the fog lifts up a lot, and luckily we stumble upon a foot trail. A weird note. We hike back there a couple of days later during full daylight and looked for the place, but seriously cannot find it again. We literally hiked there for hours. Now, on a second weird note, my wallet fell out of my back pocket, and when we're sliding down the hill, we ended up getting back far away from Charles, but my ID showed up in the mail a week later in an envelope with no note or shipping address. Doing a group trip in the woods, literally 40 minutes from any town, we ask our group leader if we can go back to our cabin as night rolls around. He says sure, and we begin to walk. We have to walk through a path that's 10 minutes long and in the middle of a thick forest. When we're about halfway to the cabin, I get an uneasy feeling. I turn around and literally 10 feet behind us is this guy in a yellow poncho following us. I tell my friends and we all turn around, but none of us recognized him. The guy in the poncho just smiles at us for a second and then runs off the path into the woods. So my friends and I sprint to the cabin and enter. The rest of the group is already there. We tell the group leader about it and he calls the other leaders and they start looking around, but they don't find anything. But a new rule is put into place that requires somebody to be with the leader at all times when you're outside or just go into some of the cabins that are further away. I debated on whether or not to actually share this as it's a super short amount of time and I didn't see anything, but I ultimately decided that maybe I should go for it. My husband 28 and I 25 stay in a small town that borders an absolutely massive redwood forest. We're about 15 minutes or less away from the trees of mystery. We live on a street that was built in the middle of the forest for whatever reason. Now there's two large patches, maybe 5 or 15 miles plus, one of which has a small forest bridge that connects to an even larger forest. On either end of our street, I will also say we tend to be night owls, preferring to stay up late and wake up late. So, the set into what happened, my husband was getting ready for bed while I sat under the covers. It was a nice cool night after a hot day, so I opened the window to just curl up under my blankets for 5 minutes with the wonderful air on my face. While laying on my phone on my side, not fully asleep, I then begin to look up and I can see a full moon. I was surprised to find that the moon was on 100% tonight, so I looked outside my window from my bedside and confirmed the amount of light on the ground outside on our street, which has no street lights since it's an old street. It's very well lit in a bluish tone colour. I was kind of like, oh, neat, and went back to my phone. I wait for my husband to get into bed before I start falling asleep. I don't know if it's a comfort thing or not, but I usually can't sleep well unless he's near me. I was wide awake, sitting there for about 5-ish minutes listening to the crickets outside when I can hear a man scream up my street. It sounded like it was coming 2 or 3 doors down, near to one of the edges of the forest. At first it was just a fearful scream, but then it moved and continued to almost like a guy doing a fake scream. Why? It's 2 a.m, but the scream goes on for far too long, and then at the tail end of it, it went from kind of like a silly fake one to a deep, gurgling roar, similar to, I don't know, like something transforming in the movies. But at first, it doesn't sound real, almost like something forcing or pretending a scream, then a very deep sound afterwards. I don't recall whether or not the crickets went silent, by the way. I just know that I was no longer trying to listen to them after hearing that noise. I have wondered Sasquatch or maybe werewolf or dogman, some other creepy critter like that, or God knows what. But I know nothing normal or person should be able to scream for that long or that deep. Plus it echoed and felt like it was reverberating off a speaker in a room, but of course it wasn't. I've gone through every possibility and not really had any explanation as to what this scream was. I am neither of the things in this title, however. I was in a Firewise program with the county, We clearly and thoroughly searched 400 square feet and found somebody's house. Anyway, we were clearing brush around an elderly man's home and he suggested over and over again that this one area is of no threat and we just skip it. Well, we can't just skip it. That'd leave a weak spot, so we have no choice. After getting almost all of it clear, there was a bit of a ladder fuel in one area. We used a bladder weed eater to do this kind of thing. After getting almost the entire area of a 10 or 15 foot square patch cleared, I could not knock down this one patch level to the ground. I've actually dented the blades trying to do this, realizing I was hitting a metal bar, so I dug around it and realized it was a refrigerator buried so deep with only one handle sticking out. After finding this, I alert my co-worker. Now, by the way, we never found anything like this. Usually it's just trees and stuff. So he comes up and we play a game. No, you open it game. After about 5 minutes, curiosity gets the better of me and I go for it, but it's jammed. So I started reaming on it and he helps me and kind of screeches a little bit. It smelt like nothing I've ever smelt before. The most horrid stench. We back up like 30 feet and it doesn't help. So I walk up and open it all the way. The smell made my eyes water and regret having a nose. My mouth was open a little bit and I could really taste this stench. I figure, what the hell? The worst already happened. I peek inside and it's an assortment of bones. I can't tell if it's animal or not. There are no horn skulls, if that makes sense. Just random figurements like ribs and long bones, like ones in animals' legs, I think. So we mention this to our boss and he says he'll put it in a report. A couple of weeks later it becomes a, I don't know the word, area of interest I guess, and apparently another service has to investigate. However, since this was the very last of the entire area to be cleared, once we had left that day, nobody went back until the crew arrived a month later, only to find a very large hole where the fridge was. The homeowner denies having any clue about it whatsoever. I still don't know what I stumbled upon. So story time. A couple of years ago, I lived in a house outside of Charlotte that was right next to what our city folk called a greenway. Essentially, it's really an undeveloped land between existing developments that, due to the layout of the infrastructure and topography land, could not be clear-cut and paved enough to make it cost-effective, so they just put up trails and parks and sold it as a natural spot to increase the property values in the area. Well, my girlfriend at the time had a daughter, and the daughter's school was on this one-way end of the greenway, and we live on the other. It actually took less time to walk there than to drive, so on nice days, I'd grab the stroller, carry it to her school, and pick her up at the end of the day, and then we'd have a really nice walk through the woods. Well, this particular greenway waved through some areas that were pretty close to rather busy roads, so it wasn't unusual to hear road noises like big trucks or motorcycles or whatever. Turns out that coyotes in this area responded to things like fire engines, sirens, much in the way that they did in any other situation. Long story short, I had my girlfriend's kid in the middle of the woods and we hear a fire engine, and as the sound dies from there, we hear dozens of coyotes responding in kind. Now they completely surround us. Normally I wouldn't be very afraid. It's very unusual even for a pack of coyotes to attack humans. However, I remembered the uncomfortable truth that sometimes they do, and can actually attack dogs and, eat and kill them once they've surrounded them. So parent mode kicks in. While trying to maintain calmness as to not freak out the kid, I pick her up and carry her in one arm and the stroller in the other. I ran as fast as I could the remaining distance, I don't know, maybe half a mile or so. This took me maybe all of 5 minutes, but it was honestly the scariest thing of my life. So a girlfriend and I took a 2-week road trip last year and backwards camped slash hiked the whole time. As some insight, I'm also a girl, so there's two 20-something year olds out on the road. We got to one free campsite in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, and we're the only people out here. Not unusual, so we just take up the first spot and set up. As we make dinner, a couple pulls in, drives by and heads to the back of the campgrounds. We don't really know how far back they went. About 20 minutes later, they come by and flag me down. Girl, have you been back there? Me, no. Girl, it's a massacre back there. What do you mean? There's bones everywhere. Mind if we take the spot next to you? No, not at all. Then maybe 2 minutes later, look around, get back into the car and leave. I say, what's all that about? I explained to my friend what the girls said, and at that moment, we look down and see a huge femur bone at our feet, possibly from a cow. Well, us being a little cryptic, decide to go and check out what they're talking about. About 100 yards back, through the windy camp, and there it is. There's full-blown animal carcasses everywhere, some scattered and some still whole. And there's one pile of what appears to be fox fur, another deer body in a trash bag. Our theory is that's where they dump all the roadkill, which they scrape up off the highway. But we didn't figure this out for a few days. Nonetheless, if there's that many bodies there, it's weird where they come from, because there must be a massive predator that we don't know about. So we decided to pack up and find a different camp. For campsite 2 of the night, we're about an hour or so drive, still in the middle of nowhere. Haven't seen a single car this time, no houses, just old country roads and pastures. Mind you, the sun is setting. The road turns to dirt for a bit. We cross a cattle guard and see the national park sign. Sweet, it's a national park and it's free. It can't be too bad. My friend thinks it looks a little sketchy, but we're ready to relax and grab some food. So I hit a left and start up the hill to the national park. Looks like it's only about 2 miles from the map. We start going up this road, go around a few curves, and on the side, we realise that the brush is getting thicker and thicker, and the road starts getting rough. Now, to put this into perspective, we're in a fairly new Chevy, manual transmission. It's less than a foot clearance from the ground. About a quarter of a mile in, we high center on a massive rock. Okay, as long as this doesn't get any worse, I think we can manage. There's no possible way to turn around or get back, so we have to keep going. Of course it got worse. Every rock and trench we hear the car scrape and shutter and stall. I'm clinching the wheel, she is clinching the handle. All the brush on the side of us is now dead and eerie looking, and the sun is almost gone behind us. 30 terrifying minutes later, we finally make it to the top flat that is supposed to be a campsite. It's about 10 square foot clearing in the middle of the dead brush, and in front of us a cliff. We're still freaking out about the dead animals, but now we feel like we're in the middle of a low budget horror film, and we need to get out of there. Now, we decide we cannot in our right mind stay here. Even from the cliff top, we can't see a single house or car light. We decide to make a 10-point turn between the brush and the boulder and the cliff, manage to get back on the path and very slowly and carefully, terrified all the way, get back down the damn hill. We in the car manage to miraculously survive and head out after 2 hours back to the closest town and sleep in a Walmart parking lot. I was backpacking in the Beartooth Wilderness in the early 2000s with a good friend of mine. 3 days into the hike, we had only seen one other couple. On the third night, at about 4 AM, we're woken to our tents, in which sounds like the scream of a massive animal. Obviously we're freaked out, sitting in the tent not knowing what was out there. We started hearing what sounded like howl for about 15 minutes, followed by heavy footsteps near our camp. My friend and I started yelling, making tons of noise, a trick that tends to fend off bears. The commotion outside of the tent comes to a halt slowly. The following morning, after not sleeping at all, we unzipped the tent to the creepiest scene. All around the tent are pebbles. The howl was literally thousands of pebbles that had been thrown across. Now, they surround the tent in a nearly perfect circle of 20 or so boulders. I mean, these must be 150 or 300 pounds. My friend and I noped out of there, making a 3-day hike in one, practically running the whole way to the car. I've been in 2 bad car accidents. I know the rush of adrenaline going through your head when you're in a crash. For that reason, I pull over at any crash I see to help out, unless emergency services are already there. I have a level head, basic medical training, and usually a first aid kit on me. Normally, everything is fine, and I leave once EMS/police show up. Today, that totally changed. I came around a bend and saw a pickup that had hit a tree. A body was slumped over in the seat. I immediately pulled my bike into subdivision right across the street and ran over. Quickly grabbing my bag, taking off my jacket and helmet, I see a white man in his late 20s with a slim frame slumped over in the seat. Confused. I'm not sure what his situation is. I can see that there's saliva dropping down the side of his face. My brain instantly went to seizure. The car who's been a little behind me also pulled over. The driver's calling 911 right next to me. He tapped on the window a bit, and there was no response. I jumped into the bed to see if the back window was. None of them were there. I hopped out and went to see if anything has changed. The driver's no longer convulsing, but he was still non-responsive. I knocked on the window to see if he had come out of it. The driver jumped up and began panicking. This is pretty common for someone who's had a seizure, especially if they've had a traumatic experience on top of it. He began yelling and lightly punching the window. This happened for a span of around a second, which meant I jumped 20 feet in the air. Once my brain cleared for a second, I loudly say, "Are you alright?" if he could unlock the door. Luckily for me, he didn't understand a word I said. He slumped back over, which prompts me to knock again. He then jumps back up and promptly begins freaking out once again. After a quick moment, he calms down again and sat there smiling. It wasn't a normal smile. It was sort of haunting. His tongue was hanging out, very yellowed. The man who pulled over with me, Mark, came around, which brought another round of freaking out. This began the pattern of any new stimuli causing him to freak out. A third person pulled over and came to check in. He quickly came to the same conclusion: drugs. Our driver was now in a relaxed state until the sirens started. Me and a third person began directing traffic while Mark kept an eye on the driver, relaying everything to 911. I had to move my jacket, helmet and bag over near my bike, just in case he started driving again. About a minute after we heard the first sirens, the fire truck, ambulance and sheriff pulled up. The fire truck blocked traffic from one end, and after briefly talking to the cop, Mark went to start turning cars around from the other direction. A cop pulled up from the end blocked by the fire truck. The 2 cops, after determining that the driver was combative, drew their tasers. A firefighter used a pick to break open the driver's side window. After the first hit, the driver began to claw at the back window. Once it had been pulled out, The cops began yelling at him to open the door, par for the course. The driver doesn't get a word. They decide to smash the front window. After the first hit, they didn't have to do much, as the driver began hitting back. He punched the window out entirely. The cops yelled some more. The driver's still yelling and punching. The first cop tased him. If we didn't hear the crackling, we wouldn't have known he was tased. He's still punching. Second cop tases him. Still nothing. First cop again. Second cop. And the first cop tased again. And the second cop opens the door. The driver begins kicking and punching while getting dragged out of the car. The cops attempt to hold him down. The largest of the firefighters jumps on him, and now there's 6 cars flying up the road towards us. They all ran over to assist. Now, eventually me and Mark had to stick around to be interviewed by the highway officer. This experience really made me scared of people and drugs, as I wasn't already. It really turns them into some kind of monster out of a film, almost unstoppable. This happened only a couple of months ago, so I'm still quite on the edge. I had a group of friends that lived about an hour and a half away from me, and I'd frequently go hang out with them. The drive never bothered me, but this particular night I dreaded it. I first noticed a car about 20 minutes into my trip home. It was about 2 AM, so not many cars are on the road. Now this guy was practically hitting my bumper the whole way, which is strange because there's no other cars there. I quickly wrote it off and turned on my music. The time on the freeway is about an hour, and he was behind me the entirety of it. When I saw he was getting off the same exit, I began getting nervous. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I was heading home as I normally would, until I noticed this car making every turn behind me. I start turning down random roads testing my theory, and he's trailing me the whole time. I stop going towards my home and start driving random, trying to think of what to do. I tried whipping down roads at this last second, but it didn't work. I was driving through red lights and stop signs because I was so scared of what might happen if I stopped. By this point I was desperate. I decided to call the police, telling them that I'd been followed for over an hour. I gave them a description of the car and my location. The dispatcher told me to drive to the police station, and there's going to be officers waiting in the parking lot. As soon as I turned to the parking lot, the driver sped off. One of the police cruisers immediately flips their lights on and followed them. I give my statement but never hear anything back. This happened just a few days ago, while I was walking home from work. I should explain, I live in a small rural community. It's a very safe, rather quiet town. I walk to and from work every day. I carry both a box cutter and pepper spray at all times. I feel rather comfortable walking at night and actually find it calming. It was about 10:15 on this particular night when my journey began. I had a very uneasy feeling that I couldn't place. I decided to call my boyfriend. I knew he couldn't do much since he's at least 3 hours away, but at least he could call the police if something happened. We talked and laughed as long as I walked. Everything was fine. That was until I passed the Goodwill parking lot, which is a halfway point. I looked over and saw a man sitting in his truck staring at me. I didn't think much of it, People can be odd, and perhaps he was simply dozing. As I passed the parking lot, I heard the truck start up behind me and felt a little uneasy. We just kept walking, thinking I'm being paranoid. I should also note that there's a young man walking 300 feet in front of me. He kept stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. Because of this, I walked slower than I would normally. I didn't want to catch up with him. Eventually he crossed the street and I began to pick up the pace. As I was about to reach the entrance to my neighbourhood, the truck from before flew around the corner, stopping 500 feet in front of me. He turned his truck so it's blocking the road. I'm now freaking out. I tell my boyfriend what's happening. He says don't worry, everything will be okay. I continue walking and watched as this man got out of his truck, standing in front of it, staring directly at me. I put my head down, tightly grasping my box cutter. I got closer and closer to the man, my breathing getting heavier and heavier. I could tell he was at least 6 feet tall, and the streetlight shone down on him. I can see his arms bulge. I'm only 5 foot. Now I'm pretty small too. Suddenly though, a car came from down the street, maneuvering around the truck. About 30 seconds later, a car followed suit, then a third. When the fourth car passed, I saw the man smack his fist in frustration. He clumsily climbs back inside, took a sharp U-turn before tearing out of the neighbourhood. If those cars had not come by, I honestly don't know what would have happened to me. Let me start by saying that I really enjoy driving, and I'll often be on the road for hours just listening to music, getting lost. So more often than not, I sleep in my car on the side of a country road. I don't like it when I'm the passenger though. I always go alone. Usually, I sleep for a bit, wake up, then go home without incident. There's been a couple of times when a deer has startled me, or even a person knocking on my window to make sure I was okay. Always met with a scream. But what happened last night absolutely takes the cake. I took my dogs up to a really nice walk that I've read about online. I was about an hour drive, and I'd planned to drive for an hour at a time, explore a bit, then keep going so the dogs didn't get restless or bored. I'd always taken plenty of food and water, and was planning to be gone before about a day, which I was going to a park in a popular parking spot that caravanners like to go overnight. It was lovely. I had myself and my dog. We had a really good time. We arrived at a sleeping destination and found that there wasn't any place that we could actually park. The bays weren't laid out, so you had to use common sense to find a spot, so you're not blocking anyone in. The parking area was free and could only contain about 10 caravans without being too tight. I was a little annoyed, but hey, we're in a very rural area here, so it kind of makes sense. I let the dogs out to do their business and went to sleep, thinking nothing of it. To describe where I parked, it was opposite a little cottage, but not directly in front of it. There's plenty of trees there, and I don't feel nervous or anything. I know I'm not intruding on the owners in any way. I feel safe. For some reason though, I was having trouble nodding off. Usually I sleep like a baby in my car, but it's very spacious and comfortable. As silly as it may sound, to some I genuinely thought I had nothing to worry about. That was until a long, high-pitched screaming sound woke me up, and the dogs at around 11 PM. The dogs go nuts, as they usually do at the drop of a hat. I was still in a confused daze when I see a very tall man dragging what I think is a key around the perimeter of my car. He goes very slowly, not taking his eyes off me the entire time. He has a very malicious grin on his face all the while he's doing so. Horrified, I crank up my chair and start the car, ready to floor it, but he had made his way to the front of my bonnet, blocking me from reversing. This is when I thought that he was holding a butcher's knife. He held it up and waved it at me. I scream and lay on the horn. My dogs had leapt over the back seat and were practically frothing at the mouth, but it didn't faze him. This lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, not long. He then slowly walked away across the road into the cottage. I drove home without stopping. I'm never doing that again. Thanks for ruining it for me, terrifying guy. Thanks for ruining the paintwork. And thank God for cars being able to be locked. This happened my senior high school year. I was driving home alone from a movie with my friend on a Saturday night. After about the first 5 minutes, it became the same route I drove to school every day, so I was kind of on autopilot. I never text and drive and rarely speed, and definitely was not speeding because I have my junior license. I was pulling up to a light that had just turned green in enough time that I did not have to slow down. I went through the light. Then I just remembered the most force I've ever felt in my life. I opened my eyes when I heard a man banging on my window, yelling in, asking if I could get out or needed help breaking the window. I was able to get my seatbelt off. I managed to unlock it. I then went to look for my phone and the man said, "Forget the phone. I've already called the police. Please sit down on that hill far away. It's smoking and I want to make sure there's no fire." So I sit where he tells me after he says, "Am I okay?" My hand had glass in it as well as my face. Nothing life-threatening though, so I just sat there until the ambulance arrives. Right as I get on the hill, I heard the man who was yelling, saying, "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" and just took off in full sprint down the road. I was so confused. Why was this man who was just helping me chasing this poor 50-ish-year-old woman down the road? I realised it was a woman who hit me because she was nowhere to be seen initially after he got her out of the car. She was trying to flee the scene. The man successfully got her and brought her back to the scene. The cops arrive and go back to her immediately and breathalyze her. He then gives his statement. All while this was happening, there's this boy outside of his house who come and brought me a bag of M&Ms and says, "Wow, you spun so much. Does it hurt?" I had no idea my car had spun. All of a sudden, I hear lots of swearing, saying, "You think this is on me? No, you hit me." The poor boy is standing next to me. I told him to go back to his mum. I'm thankful he did. Definitely not the same for an 8-year-old. The woman screaming and swearing. She then tried to come towards me and one of the officers, but gets held back. At this point, they said she blew a .23 and they put her into handcuffs. I had yet to give a statement to the cops and I thought, what am I supposed to say? Then I realised in the midst of all this, I forget to even call my parents. My mum was across the country for work, so I called my dad. My dad was at a concert 3 hours away, so he called my neighbour. My neighbour, who's one of our best family friends, calls me and says, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't say anything to the cops until you tell me the story first. I then tell him that I'm nervous because I was the one to T-bone her. He said just tell me what happened, and I said I went through 100% green light and the lady went through the red hitting me and she blew a .23. He lost it. He went over and said, you almost just killed an 18-year-old because you got behind a wheel after drinking. How stupid are you to be doing this? And she said, well, I wish I'd actually killed her, and started swearing again. She went on to scream the entire time we're there, just saying I was awful and that she wished she'd killed me. Finally the cops take her away. My car was completely done. It was a Volvo, and the cops said they've seen this car do really well in different accidents and it probably helped save me. I thought I was going to have to see her in court, but she didn't even show up. I hope to never see her again. I wish I got the name or number of the man who helped me. He just disappeared after giving his statement. A real hero. I really don't know what would have happened if he wasn't there and I was left with that crazy lady. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want early access to my stories, and make sure you check out the podcast in the description below that will have all of my stories uploaded there too. I have a quick message before the story starts, so if you want to go straight to the stories, and there's timestamps in the description for that below. So just quickly, whatever you're struggling with or any of your battles with your mental health, it can and will get better. I believe in you and you just have to stay consistent and stay in the fight. So I hope everyone enjoys the stories and has a great weekend. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. I had a long career spanning many different things and I wore lots of different hats throughout my time. Now some of the most interesting ones happened when I was a lot younger than I am now. I remembered a job that I truly enjoyed and still felt pride about doing, even to this day, was when I was a fire ranger. Now it basically meant I'd have to brave the scary stairs going up to the top of those big old towers and just keeping a watch out for anything that could be potentially dangerous or a fire. A lot of people don't realise we do more than just look for fires specifically up there, and it's a relatively difficult job because you have to look out for other people and other things you might not think about. And of course you have to try and stay sane up there yourself and make sure that you're not seeing things. Now this is actually quite difficult to do, especially if you spend all of your time alone there. Now most of the time I was there I thoroughly enjoyed the experience, so sometimes I guess the isolation or loneliness would get to me. If ever it got like that, I'd just go down for a little while and just start reading books for a few minutes while periodically looking around to make sure there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Now there'd been a rumour going round for years about some kind of figure with a dark robe that would just appear in the background and you could kind of see through it. It would be hard to describe, but it was almost like when the setting was very dark, this would stand out as being completely out of the ordinary. People described it as a child kind of facing away from you and slowly fading off into the trees. Originally I didn't really believe it too much. I was more worried about another issue we had. There was an old cabin out there, right in the middle of nowhere in the area that we would cover, and there would always be reports of an elderly gentleman sitting down at the table who would seemingly be completely oblivious to everyone else. Whenever we went out there to actually go and figure out what was going on or say, hey, you're not meant to be there, he would seemingly disappear as soon as you got close. For a while we wondered if it was an optical illusion, and we actually took out all of the remaining furniture from in there, but he kept on appearing. That was up until there was a really big fire there. What made this place really interesting though is that once it had all burnt down, you could see a basement that we didn't know existed, and there's still some of the path to get down into it now. But anyway, that's the story for another time. Today I'd like to share this one with you. I'd been doing my shift for a while now, and not much was out of the ordinary. We did have something weird that I had to investigate at one point. It was probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and everything was normal. Like I said, nothing was out of the ordinary this day, and it's actually quite peaceful. It's relatively cold out during this moment, and I had a report from some people hiking that apparently they'd seen strange figures not moving out in the forest. I felt, oh god, this is great, this is just what I need when everything's going so well. Kind of hesitant to believe what they're actually seeing and worried that maybe they'll come across a dead body, I decided to investigate. Now the problem is, when I was trying to investigate this, they couldn't really tell me the location they're in. They actually needed help getting back to the main areas. This was actually relatively annoying because it meant I had to spend about 10 days trying to give them directions. Of course it's an exaggeration, but when there's not really reference points, it becomes increasingly difficult for people to know where you're talking about, especially out here, but that's understandable. I eventually wave them off and call in that I need to go and investigate something, and they say it's fine, they're going to cover me for a bit. I have to wait for a while for the other ranger to come over and quickly get into my tower so I can go out there. I tell them that it's potentially a body, and they say just proceed with caution because you don't know who's out there. After waiting for a good half hour or so, eventually my cover came. We said hey, and the other ranger said, do you want to take the truck out, it's already running. I said sure. I got in and immediately some sound blasted my eardrum. It scared the life out of me. I took a second before I realised that he had the radio on absolute blast, and honestly it left a ringing in my ear. He apologised not realising it was going to come on again, but honestly it annoyed me because it really unsettled me. I drove round to the rough area that the hikers were able to tell me that they saw the figures, and I found absolutely nothing. The trees are quite dense in this area, and there's lots of shadows cast by the trees, so it actually becomes relatively difficult to navigate or see anything. Regardless of isolation, your mind will play tricks on you, and luckily for me, nothing was out of the ordinary. I decide to head off a little further now and leave the truck. I don't have a flashlight or anything because it's still quite early in the day at this point. I just decide that I need to go and see what's up. I'm not that far away from a stream, which I actually find really peaceful, and I decide that after a while of looking, I'm gonna go and rest here for a little bit. I can't see anything out of the ordinary at first, I just constantly look behind myself to make sure that I don't get lost on my little journey. I proceed ahead but don't find much of anything, deciding that it's probably best just to go over to the stream and relax. Now the area itself is really beautiful. I decided just to stand off to the embankment and appreciate how beautiful this place is. If you're hiking, you can do a really nice loop around here, and honestly it's breathtaking. It's the kind of place that no matter where you take a picture you could put it on a wall, if that makes sense. I find a nice little spot and sit down, just on a rock that's out of the moisture from the ground. I take a few moments just to meditate and decide to be silent. This can actually be quite a good technique if you can't find anything on a search. That's because you're probably going to hear people if you can't see them, if there's any about. I start to think more and more that the hikers are just kind of losing it a bit and are just playing tricks with me, so I decide that I should probably head back. I then leave the stream and jokingly say goodbye, knowing that I don't want to leave this area so soon. I then make it back to the truck and I start off again in the direction that I've come. I radio in that I've not found anything, but I'll be coming back soon. I drive for about another 2 minutes and I spot it. Someone just standing there, staring off into the tree line. It's quite difficult to make out exactly what they're wearing, but they kind of look like a grey colour. They almost seem too still to be human, which I think's really odd. I stop quickly and before I get out, I decide to grab my binoculars. I then realise that I don't have them. Oh no, I've left them in the tower, I realise. I decide the best thing I can do is very slowly make my way over there instead of announcing my presence. I think it's odd they've not moved at all or really reacted to the sound of the truck, or maybe they didn't hear it. There can be an issue if it's like a lost hiker or someone who's hit their head and they're kind of shocked or not really in a normal state of mind. I realise that this person's probably about 5 feet tall and just standing there completely still. What's really odd about it is they almost look like they're covered in bones, if that makes sense. I slowly edge closer and closer and I can't believe what I'm seeing. I can see a person standing there perfectly still, but they don't look right. It looks like they're not wearing any clothes, but I can see them and they're right in front of me. I then get a little closer and realise that it's not a person at all. It's an arrangement of wood, perfectly resembling a person. I look to my left and I can't see anything else. I've just come from the right side, so I know I should be pretty safe to investigate. I very hesitantly make my way up to this weird thing, and it's basically a figure made out of wood and carvings to perfectly resemble a person. I think, there's no dead body at least. But who put it here and why? I think this is extremely odd, and it's still something that kind of scares me a bit when I think of it. I go to the other side and there's no face. I look up and my heart drops. There's 2 more figures further off, but they're more like people this time. I quickly duck down but realise it's futile. These people are standing there by the stream that I've literally just come from. They literally look like headless figures. I realise now that there's something really odd here, but I'm not sure whether they're people or not, or just more of these things. I can then see another behind and another. I realise then that they're forming a circle. I realise now that I'm not in too much danger and slowly make my way over. And I'll be surprised. They are wooden figures, just like the other one, just not very detailed this time. Standing there, placed perfectly while being still. It's very bizarre because their hands are relatively detailed and it really gives me the creeps. I look around for whoever put these here, but it's literally like somebody's just placed them out of nowhere. I think this is really bizarre. Maybe it's some kind of art project that I'm not aware of, but that doesn't make sense. I almost think for a second it's kind of cool. I take a moment to scour the horizon and I can't see anything else and decide that it's really time to head back. I can't wait to report this in because this is really weird. I slowly begin making my way back towards the truck and I take one last look at these things. And they haven't moved, thankfully. I kind of expected them to move forward. I almost thought about, for a joke, throwing one on the back of the truck and just setting it up somewhere to scare the other guy that was working with me. But I think this is a bad idea, and I don't really want to get in trouble or get some weird reputation at work. So I decide just to head over and act like nothing was wrong and just say, "Hey, I'm coming over, sorry about the delay," on the radio. And then make it back to the tower and say, "Hey, I'm here, Andy." He says, "Hey, come on up quickly," and I make my way up. Now I haven't told him anything at this point, and he says, "There's something weird. I keep seeing something white just off in the distance, sort of moving around and disappearing every so often periodically." I say, "Oh, I know just what that is. I've literally just come across some really weird sculptures in the middle of this forest. They look very much like people, but do you know about any art projects? Art projects? Andy laughs and says, no, of course not. Who would put them out here? He says, did you bring one with you? And I jokingly said, yeah, I did. It's right here behind me. And he says, no, cut it off. Did you actually bring one? I say, no, why would I do that? I tell him roughly where it is so he can go and investigate, and he says he's going to check it out later. He then says, seriously, did you see anything out there unusual? I say, yeah, of course, the figures, but he says no, any actual people. I say no, and that I'm pretty sure there's no bodies out here that we have to look for, and he says that's a relief. He thinks too the hikers probably saw this and got confused and scared. Now, are you absolutely certain the hikers didn't leave these here? I say, yes, Andy, of course. I would have told you, and why would I have investigated? He said sorry for the stupid question, but he says he really wants to keep an eye out on this figure he saw. Now, at the time, he'd been working quite a few long shifts, and never reported anything like it before, so I say, come on, just relax. I think it's just the isolation getting to you, and he says you're right. He then hands over the reins to me once again, and we say our goodbyes. He says he's going to check it out on the way and takes the truck with him, and with that he leaves. Now I do keep my eye out for probably a good another 20 minutes trying to see anything out there, but I don't see anything at all. Every so often the trees kind of move, and I think this is odd, but I think it's just where I'm staring at it for too long. I look around in the rough area that Andy's drove off to, and there it is. A white figure, just standing there perfectly. I really start laughing to myself, realizing what he's done. He's placed one of them wooden figures there, obviously to scare me. I think, you could have got me with that, to be honest. And I turn around and just completely ignore it. I then decide that I should call on him and make sure that he got back okay. And he did. I say, that was a nice little prank you did on me. And he says, what prank? I say, yeah, leaving that thing there. And he sounds very confused, and his confusion actually put fear into me. He's 100% certain that he hasn't done anything the type. He said, listen, all I've done is drove back. And I was kind of freaked out by that figure I saw earlier. That's when the penny dropped. There's definitely something up now. I say, I'm going to investigate it quickly. He says, please check in with me again, and I say, yeah, I will, I promise. And I quickly head down from the tower. I look up, and the thing's gone. I was certain I saw one of those wooden figures there earlier, and I feel stupid now going back saying that there's nothing there. I get on the radio and say, oh, don't worry, it's probably just nothing. I think it's just my mind messing with me from what you said earlier. I always thought I had an overactive imagination. And he says, yeah, just be careful, buddy. Something's definitely up. With that, the radio switches off, and I decide to lay down for a bit. Now, I was actually pretty bored most of the times up here, so I decided to do some drawings. I decide that I'm just going to draw the horizons and some of the landscapes around me. To be honest, this is actually quite good because it really keeps my mind active. It'd be really funny if I drew a big fire and didn't realise it until afterwards, right? But anyway, I start my drawings and keep checking out for any danger periodically again. And then I see it once more. There's a white figure out there, definitely moving and somewhat glowing. That was the part I really don't understand. It was literally illuminating some kind of light, or at least that's how it appeared. That's it. I have to investigate now. I quickly grab my jacket and put my pencil down and decide that I'm gonna have to figure out what's wrong here, because this is really odd. I'm much more cautious now because the night sets in, and my eyes haven't really adjusted to the darkness that well because I had a small lamp on so I could do my drawings. Now I get to the bottom of the steps and I start heading in the direction that I saw this weird figure in. At first I start jogging, then I realise how unfit I am and I have to stop after about 30 seconds. That's odd. I've always been pretty in shape, but maybe I've just let myself go a bit. Who knows? I then go to the exact area where I saw this thing not 5 minutes ago, and there's nothing there. As I'm standing there, I can hear a faint laughter. It's really creepy because it literally sounds like a small child laughing. I suddenly feel very faint and realise that maybe there's a missing child out here. I have to figure out what this is now. I suddenly become more brave and start sprinting towards where I think the sound's coming from. I run and run, and I don't seem to be getting any closer to the sound. I'm quiet for a moment, and I can just hear the sounds of the nature and the trees around me, and I realise that something's wrong. Why has the sound stopped suddenly? Why couldn't I find it? Then, just ahead again, I can see some white figure just moving behind a tree. I decide that I have to jog over there now and figure out what this is. This time it doesn't move luckily, and I say, "Hey, I've got you," to myself, half expecting to find either somebody out here who's completely off their mind that's fell and hit their head, or maybe a lost child even, but this seems a little too big now. I sprint and get just to the edge of the tree and decide I'm going to jump out and shout "freeze," just in case it's anyone dodgy. And I jump, freeze, nothing. Not a sound. I look around quickly and do a 360 and I can't find anything. I decide that I should get back to the station now and maybe call in some help, and I head out. I start picking up the pace and I can hear my footsteps slowly getting louder and louder as I'm somewhat panicking now and walking somewhat clumsily at more of a hiker's pace. Now I swear to you, as I got onto the first steps of my tower, that I can hear laughter again. I stop for a moment to confirm it, then very quickly start going up the steps. I get back in and radio in what I've heard, and that's when my friend Andy says that that's exactly what he heard too. A strange faint laughter, but he thought it was coming from me originally. He says unless you have 100% confirmation, there's not much he could do, but just to be careful and not worry too much. Be careful? That's great. How am I going to sleep at night now? I think. Yeah, I can lock the door off, but that's not really an effective way to stop somebody breaking in. Anyone could just bust the door in, or even set fire to this thing or knock it over, or God knows what. I say yeah, that's fine, and I decide that I really need to figure out what's wrong here. I sit on kind of like the balcony thing where I can see around, but this is one-dimensional, mind you, but I don't see much of anything. I think maybe, just maybe, I've been out here for too long, and you know what they say, you can only see faces you've dreamt of. Maybe I was so tired I was kind of half dreaming and it was based off the wooden figures I saw before. But then I remembered, what were they? Why were they out there? Strangely enough, they seemed relatively similar in height to that thing that I saw. And maybe Andy wasn't actually seeing anything and there was a reason for me to be concerned. Now, I half fall asleep on top of this balcony again, and kind of hit my head to wake myself up, which is actually quite funny. I remembered laughing, think, well, there's my alarm clock, as I raise my head up, and just at the base of my tower, I can see a white figure somewhat glowing. I wipe my eyes and think, this cannot be real, this must be some kind of dream. I quickly look at my watch and I've only been asleep for about 10 minutes. In my dream, I felt like I was there for an eternity, but of course I wasn't. It was only a number of minutes. But I have to investigate now. I'm very convinced that my mind's just gone a little bit weird, and I decide to head down. When I take my very first step, I can hear something running. I think, right, I've got you now. I lurch forward but nearly go off the edge of the tower because I'm still not really woken up at this point, and I'm almost off balance. I manage to steady myself and much slower now make my way down. I say, hey. There's nothing. I then shout out another hey again, and I'm met with silence. I'm actually getting relatively frustrated now, and I kid you not, I can hear the laughing once again. I spin around and I can see the figure. Now, through coincidence or not, it was actually heading to where I saw the wooden sculptures earlier. I didn't realise this at the time, but looking back on it is kind of weird. This thing is kind of sprinting off into that direction, suddenly not making any sound at all. And me being me, I sprint straight after it, thinking maybe it is somebody that's really off their head now and needs emergency medical attention or maybe an evacuation. I know if you hit certain parts of your head you can really lose it due to the brain swelling, but if you have brain swelling due to the intracranial pressure, you can easily die from it within a matter of hours, and if that was the case, then this person wouldn't have much longer left. So, I chase after them. Now, I'm struggling for direction at this point, but I can always see the tower, so I know roughly where I'm going. I never seem to be able to catch up with this thing, which is really weird because based off the adrenaline I have and my long legs, I can sprint pretty quick, and it doesn't make sense for pretty much anything to be able to outrun me out here, especially because as a fire ranger I'm always out in the forest. I'm always going to have that edge of knowing the environment and being used to the terrain, but it didn't seem to apply now, which is really bizarre. It was almost like this thing had a supernatural ability to be able to just, I don't know, vanish at will. I ran as quick as I possibly could for as long as possible until eventually I had to catch my breath once again. Now I sprinted and sprinted until eventually I got to the exact spot that I saw this thing go to, just behind some of the trees and down a small hill, and there was nothing. Kind of worried that now something bigger than what I know about is happening. I feel pretty scared, and I just stop and put my hand into my head and just sit there for a moment. I realise now that I'm not really chasing this thing. Whatever this thing is kind of playing a game with me almost, and I'm not sure how to make it stop. That's when I see it. Some strange light just illuminating behind me. I stand up and turn around to see what it is, and for a few seconds I can see a very bright figure just standing there about 5 feet tall, too bright for me to be able to look at properly, literally hurting my eyes. And then I wake up off the floor. Now, what's really weird is that when I come to, it's not like I'm out of it. I'm immediately with my senses again, but something just feels different this time. The atmosphere just feels completely different. I get up and look around and realise that my eyes really hurt. Like when you've been staring at the sun for too long, like really bad. Even to the point that, you know when you've looked at something bright and it kind of lingers in your eyes for a second and goes weird colours? I still have that just a little bit. I look up at the sky and I can still see the stars, so luckily I'm not blinded, so I'm happy about that. Now, in somewhat a state of shock and confusion, I look around and realise that lots of the scrubs and things on the floor have kind of burnt a bit. It's very difficult to describe, but it's almost like the life has been sucked out of them, similar to when something was burnt, but through heat but not fire, if that makes sense. And it pretty much forms a perfect circle around where I'm standing. I look down at my arms and they're somewhat sunburnt almost, appearing much more red than usual, and it's not on the other side of my arms too, which is really odd. I feel my face and that's completely fine, but my arms are quite burnt, which is something I've never experienced before. I look around and this thing is long gone. Luckily for me, there is evidence of this circle here, so I decide now that I'm going to have to get back to the tower, and in a moment of clarity realise I should get a shift on and start travelling very quickly. In no time at all I make it back up to the tower and radio in what's happened, and Andy, bless him, comes over to see what happened. Upon arrival he says, "God, what happened to your arms?" and I can't really explain it in the moment and just say, look, you have to come here. I take him back to the exact spot where that flash was and I explain what happened, and he can't believe his eyes. It's almost like there was a small heat wave around this area only, and so much of the circle has died. It's only about 6 feet across, but it's all the same, and it forms almost a perfect circle. He says that he's going to radio it in and just to take a break for a moment, and that's what he does. I go with him back up to the tower, and he says that he's going to stay with me for the rest of the night to make sure nothing else happens, and that's what he does. I fall asleep quite quickly and I'm woken up by the pain of the burning on my arms. We make eye contact, and you know when your look can say 1,000 words? It's one of those moments. He just nods and we both know that we have to go back to that circle again. On the walk he tells me nothing else has happened but he really needs sleep, but we get there and thankfully for our sanity it's still there. The cover come over and we decided not to tell them what happened. We've already made a report about it and we don't want to scare them, and we need to confirm it's not only us seeing these things, and we say goodbye to them, and luckily Andy offers to drive me home. Now nothing ever come of that investigation, and we never saw that flash of light again. I'm still not sure exactly what it is, but it must be something paranormal. And what's really truly bizarre is that life never grew in that spot again. Eventually the ground just becomes somewhat sodden dirt, but nothing ever grew again. Literally for about another 10 years that I was working there. It still is and has remained one of the most unexplainable things that ever happened to me, and I can only really think of it as being paranormal, or some kind of supernatural energy that we're not supposed to mess with, and somehow I ended up doing so unwillingly. Now this is when I was only about 7 and we're camping near a spring we swam at often. Now I woke up one morning and went down to the spring to wash up, and there's a huge alligator that hissed at me from the bank. It was probably 20 feet long and easily 5 times my height. I stopped and ran out of there. Weird things happen in the Appalachian Mountains. They're as old as time itself, and people who have lived there may be the first to tell you that it can become otherworldly, and sometimes you just have to turn a blind eye for your own sanity, or you'll just be like, yep, this is just how it is. I grew up in a small town outside of Pishwan National Forest. Lots of waterfalls, hikes, great views. It's an amazing place to be, especially in summer, but what happened to me was in the dead of winter, when I was about 17. Before I write all of this, let me preface by saying at the time, I just got my very first prescription glasses and still wasn't really used to keeping them on 24/7. But although my vision was blurry, I know something just isn't right when I see it. When I was 17, I decided to do my senior project on nature photography. What better place to take some great photos of the forest? I said to my mother if she'd drive me into Big Ash and let me take some pictures as she winded through the woods. It was winter, so the trees were bare and the sky was grey. It was still fairly pretty out, to be honest, and I just wanted to take some pictures of the local flora. So my mum pulls over to let me walk down a trail that I've been over hundreds of times. After a short walk through the woods, you end up on the riverbank, a great swimming hole in the summer, and the way the bank curved, you could walk along the little stony shore a little way past the trail. Mind you, I was wearing a bright orange raincoat, so it was incredibly visible, so I'm crouching down to take a picture of an old railroad spike that's been sticking out of the earth for years when all of a sudden, I realised there's no sound. Like, honestly, it was really scarily silent. No birds chirping, no nature sounds or anything. It's like I didn't even hear the sound of water flowing. as this is happening, I realize exactly how visible and vulnerable I am. If you've experienced some kind of primal fear, you'll know what I mean. It's like an alarm bell's going off in your head screaming danger, danger. As I'm sitting there with this feeling washing over me, I start hearing crunching footsteps around. Again, all of the trees around are so bare that there isn't any foliage to block any view. I hear these footsteps like slowly getting 2 feet closer and closer, and it's from the opposite side of the riverbank. I'm watching very closely and I can't move. I can't move. Whatever I saw was all grey and not a human, but tall, and appears to be on 2 legs. It was getting closer and closer, and right as it's about to reach the bank of the river, I snapped out of the trance and really sprint. I've never been so scared in my life. I booked it back to my mum's car and was so obviously out of breath that she says, "What's wrong?" After I explained what happened, she looked really scared and said that while I've gone down the trail, she got this weird fear that suddenly something was wrong and was about to come and find me when I ran back. We left after that, and to this day sometimes we will talk about it with no explanation. I've told my boyfriend this story and he insists that it could have been a skinwalker. I've got no idea what it was, although I wish I'd gotten a better look. I'm glad I ran when I did. Has anyone experienced anything like this, or is it just me? My husband and his sister went hiking in September or November 2020 when this happened. They were hiking Sharp Top in Southwest Virginia. They hiked the entire trail without incident, but as they were coming down the trail back towards their car, they noticed a black, opaque figure at the foot of the trail near the road. This figure was almost opaque, but they see a white at the top where a face would be, but no other features. The best I can say second-handedly to describe it is a no-face from Sprint Away, but basically no facial features. It's roughly 5 or 6 feet tall and glided across the road to the tree line. Once it hit the tree line, it basically disappears. Now, it's weird too because it's soundlessly. It's fall, so there's plenty of leaves on the floor, so you would have heard something. He said they're roughly 40 yards away from it, but it was still light out for them to see fully what was happening. This was my husband's first experience with anything paranormal, but my SLL has experienced other things. We haven't found anything similar to this, but it was so weird. So in 1992, I went camping with 3 friends. We had all recently graduated high school. We're about 40 miles from the closest town in the desert canyon lands of the Utah border with Colorado. It was overcast, which made it so you can't really see further than your hand in front of the darkness. So we're sitting around a campfire having a beer, listening to the coyotes, when suddenly they really go quiet. I had a look at my friend to see if he notices it too, and he gives me a scared look, saying, "What the hell is that?" As I turned around and look up, everything seems to go dark. It really seemed silent for a long time. Even my thoughts were silent until eventually someone asked, "What happened?" My fuzzy brain remembered my flashlight. I turned it on and went to see why the fire went out. There was barely any coals. It looked like it had been out for a while and everyone was scared. There was this feeling that something strange had happened. Everybody agreed but couldn't think of what it is. I said to my friend, "What do you think it is that he saw?" but he couldn't remember saying anything. We're freaked out because the rest of the night we really want the sun to come up, and I can't explain what happened. We weren't drunk. I felt like we lost time but have no proof. I've always had this nagging feeling that something happened that we can't remember. Something negative and probably scary. I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would actually lead to exploration drilling pads. Now basically, our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for oil producing qualities. It was mid-January, the sun hadn't quite come up yet, and when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half, and the polar nights are intense. This particular well site we're travelling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, really deep into the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we managed to finish and are heading back to our camp to finish up for our hitch and go home. Now at the beginning of the end, the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to go into and check out for safety. There's no cell reception or radios working, only up at a distance. So if you don't check in or out at a set time, they'll actually come looking for you to make sure you're okay. Now it's about 4 in the morning. Not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we're halfway across the ice roads. Travel was slow with the speed limit on the roads only 25 miles per hour. When something appears on the road in our headlights, it was a man in jeans and a sneakers and a hoodie, walking down an ice road in the wilderness at 4 AM in -20. It's not really unusual for locals to go out hunting, but I don't know, maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. He didn't acknowledge us at all as our trucks rolled up next to him. He kept shuffling forward and doesn't seem cold. His clothing, which is completely not suited for this weather, appears warm and dry. So it's definitely bizarre at that moment. I roll down the window and say, "Are you okay?" He doesn't acknowledge us but just keeps going forward, face completely blank, devoid of emotions or thoughts really. The other guy in the truck suggested that maybe he was in shock and had an accident. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudges down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There's just a lot of things about this guy that really make my hair stand on end. Now the guy behind me's in the truck's crew cabin actually had enough of this. He rolled down the window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him and get him out of it. Now before my friend could actually reach him, he suddenly spun around and latched onto my buddy's arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted everything there. My buddy groans in pain as he tries to get free. Now at that moment the guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream, it was really terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before catching the wheel. The popsicle dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm, was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held on to my friend to make sure that he stays in. After several moments, it could probably have only been a few seconds at most, my body got free from the guy and we start hauling it, getting another 30 miles out of the road. We check in with the guards and report what we've seen, and the guard looks at us like we're pulling a prank, but policy said that they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore. When he pulled back the sleeve, you could actually see bruises there. We filed a report with the guard and we're told to head back to the camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what had just happened, and the drive the rest of the way is really quiet. We flew home the following day. The next time that we saw the guard at his shack, we asked him if he ever saw Mr. Popsicle again. He told us that they searched up and down for a solid 12 hours during their shift and never saw anything, not even tracks in the snow leading off or anything that would indicate anyone was there. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for it next time, but it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that, and who would willingly bruise up their arm that bad for a prank? Now that area of Alaska is a weird place, and my god did this experience scare me. Now, this past weekend, I was on a camping trip with some friends and my buddy, and we decided to go for a hike to scout for some elk because we're going to be hunting there next month when the season opens. So we walk through the woods and eventually wind up on 2 back roads. My buddy's carrying his daughter and we've got a couple of dogs with us. Then out of nowhere we hear the crack of a rifle shot in the very distance and the sound of a bullet whizzing past us. We're about 10 feet apart, thinking someone's trying to shoot my dog perhaps. Maybe she looks like a coyote. I run up into the road clearing, screaming to stop shooting. I see a guy standing there with a rifle looking dumber than a box of rocks, so I pull out my pistol and tell him that he almost shot us, and he makes bizarre excuses. Now, he's acting like he's hunting for some kind of bird that's not actually here. It got pretty heated and he threatened me before my buddy told him to calm down. Plus we had a kid with us, so this guy shouldn't have been pointing the gun in our direction. He then says, oh, he'll find me in town, even though he 100% is wrong in the situation. So my dad and grandpa like to fish and hunt a lot. One night they decided to spend the night on the river in the Appalachian Mountains. It was really late, and they said they heard these awful screams coming from the woods on the opposite side of the water. It definitely wasn't a mountain lion or anything like that. And my dad's a pretty big guy who doesn't really get scared easily, but in that moment he was absolutely frozen with fear, explaining the sound as absolutely inhuman. He felt like whatever it was wanted them to know that they were there and that they weren't happy about it. It gives him goosebumps thinking about it. Now, we used to have a stationary caravan on a campground right at the Northern Sea. So basically the campground's really small, and there was like 40 or 50 other caravans stationed there and a few empty slots for people with tents. We stayed there for holiday one year and for some reason left a day earlier than we planned. On this particular night, someone got murdered right next to our caravan. It was 2 women sleeping in a rented one and the ex-boyfriend of one of the women who went to the campground at night, stabbing his ex and her friend, then dragging them out of the caravan, and they passed away right next to our one. My brother and I were going camping together. We were kind of going through a bit of a rough patch and it would help get our bond back together. We hadn't been camping for years and were somewhat excited to do so. We did it all the time when we were younger, and I guess not much had changed really. We had different lives, but we were still brothers, so we needed to fix our relationship. Now, for the first part of the trip, everything was going very well. We found a beautiful clearing to go and set up our camping site in, and that's what we done. As we head over, I noticed that my brother's hair was standing on end. I thought that was really bizarre, and before I can mention it to him, he tells me the same, and we think this is really odd. Both of our hairs are standing completely up on end, and there's a strange electric smell outside. We realise that we need to go back to the car to go and get something, so we both head back in. We ended up closing the car door and putting on the heating just so we could warm up, and I'm not joking, 1 second after turning it on, there's the loudest explosion sound of my life, and everything goes completely white, and I'm blinded temporarily. We look at each other in absolute shock and are frozen in fear. Then we hear the loudest thunder crashing immediately afterwards. We turn around and notice a fire next to our camping site. Our camping site has just been hit by a huge bolt of lightning and destroyed half of our contents there. We were literally only seconds away from death. I don't know what happened. I'll say the words and let them paint the picture for you to experience what I did. I'll set the scene. I'm an avid urban explorer and always have been. I love nothing more than going to old abandoned buildings and seeing what I could find, but every so often you'll get far more than you're looking for. And luck would have it that one day it was going to be my turn too. Now I had a couple of friends of mine. I'm not going to say their names or my own, but I'll just call them Ben and Ryan. Now we would love going to these strange places that nobody seemed to really know about, and one day Ryan suggested a place that was really out in the middle of nowhere, and that apparently he'd only seen once before. It was an old house that apparently had quite a large basement area in it. This place had been abandoned for a long time, and I couldn't wait to get there and explore. Now the problem was actually finding the place. Now we had to drive for a good 4 or so hours to actually reach roughly where it should have been, and we were truly driving out into the middle of nowhere to get here. Now the drive was beautiful. It was a lovely warm summer's day, and the heat really made you feel comfortable. We're having a really good time making some jokes with each other and having a laugh generally. We ended up pulling up to basically exactly where the spot is supposed to be, and there's nothing there. A little confused, Ryan offers to walk off ahead of us to find the place. I sit on the trunk of the car with Ben, and it's pleasantly warm in the summer heat. Now we truly are out in the sticks here with not much around us and not many sounds, just the odd crickets and maybe water bugs or whatever else is out here. We actually have to be careful of different scorpions and other animals like that. Eventually we can hear, "Hey, come over here, you guys have got to check this out." Excitedly, me and Ben jump up and go and see what Ryan's making fuss about, and there it is. Just off in the horizon is an old building. This thing was really big. Like, not a mansion, but just under the size of it, and it looks beautiful. If I had to guess, I would say this thing sat abandoned pretty much since the day that somebody first went in there. Now, I have this pretty nice feeling that's almost inviting, and it's something I can't really describe. It's almost like something was drawing me in there. The other two seem a little more hesitant than me to go in, but I'm really excited now. And we start making our way over there. While walking, I'm struck with how happy I feel. It's almost like a high that I can't describe. Almost like I was coming to something that I was truly belonging to. I look over to my two friends and they don't seem as excited as me, just more focused on getting there and somewhat hesitant. I laugh and say, "Hey, come on guys, it's gonna be fine. There's literally nothing to worry about. Come on, this is gonna be great." Now, as always, we never go through the front door, just in case there's anybody living there that's not supposed to be, or any kind of animals that are looking for food, so we decide to go around the back. This place has a beautiful porch and it's just really pretty. We realise that there's a window that we can prop open to enter, and I opt to go first. I slowly pry the window open and manage to pop it up. While opening the window, I actually get a splinter in my hand, but strangely I can't feel it at all. It's quite a big and nasty one too, and I head in. I then turn around to help my two friends get in too. I turn and say, "Come on, get in." And Ben's quite hesitant about going in, saying, "I don't know why, I have a really bad feeling about this." I say, "Come on, stop being stupid, it's gonna be great. We drove out here all this way," and he reluctantly follows in, and so does Ryan. Now all three of us are here. Now the building smells old, but as I turn around, I'm suddenly struck by how nice this place is. It's basically a time capsule, and it almost feels odd. I feel weirdly welcome and like I'm at home now, and we slowly make our way through the first room, out of the kitchen. Now there's no food of course, but honestly, if we open the fridge and see some, it wouldn't surprise me. My two other friends have started to warm into it now, and they're starting to enjoy the experience too. We decide that we're going to first explore the upstairs parts of the house, and then we're going to explore the ground level. We now come into a massive main hall or living area, which still has a chair there that looks like it's never been used before, and a really old clock. For some reason I keep being drawn towards the clock, and I'm not sure why this is. Of course it's sitting timeless, but it kind of emphasizes the feel of the whole situation. It really feels like we've stepped back in time at this point, and I just really feel welcome here, and I don't know why. We decide that we're going to attack the upstairs, and we all go up there, with me leading the way. I take a couple of steps onto the stairs, and I almost feel like I know my way round. It's really bizarre, but I seem to kind of know the layout in my head naturally. We get to the very top, and I first go into the bathroom. I look out of the window, and it's really a beautiful summer's day, and the other two split off, exploring some old bedrooms and things. I go to turn on the tap, and there's no water whatsoever. I try and run the bath, but again there's nothing. I turn around and head over to my friends who are in the other rooms. They're inside the main bedroom now, and they're sitting on the bed. I lay on the bed, and it's extremely comfortable. My friends say let's explore the other rooms, and I say I'll catch up with you in a minute. I lay back, and for some reason I can't seem to help but smile. I feel really at peace now, and for some reason something's drawing me into the lower level of the house. Now I tell my friends that I'm gonna go and investigate further, and they say okay, and I start heading down the stairs. I feel very happy and kind of glide down, almost like I'm in a dream. Now it's really bizarre, it really is like stepping into a museum or time capsule. Everything's just perfect, almost too perfect. I make my way into another room next to the kitchen, and I realise that there's a large picture frame here and a cabinet. I almost feel drawn to this spot, and I don't know why. I go to move the picture frame in case there's something else next to it, like a picture that's fell off, and I realise that it starts to fall down. I quickly steady myself, bracing to catch it, and then I realise it's a door. I can slowly pull it open, and it silently releases, and there's a stairway behind it. I'm looking into the darkness when I realise that there's a light switch next to me. I flick it, and to my surprise, the lights come on, and I can see a little further down. The staircase winds down, and I slowly close the picture behind me on its hinges and close the door. I'm not sure why that I didn't tell my friends where I was going, but I decide that I have to press on and explore further. I make my way down the stairs and turn, and I'm suddenly met with a couple of doors in a large room. I can't believe how big this place is. I don't know what door to go to, but I seem almost drawn to one. It's the one directly ahead of me. I open it, and I'm met by the light from the switch that I've just turned on. There's just a single light hanging from the ceiling there, and more rooms. I think this is odd, and think maybe they didn't finish furnishing down here, or maybe it was some kind of bunker, I don't know what, but it's kind of weird. There's no furniture whatsoever here, and again, I'm drawn to keep going forward. I don't know what was in those other rooms to my left and right, but I open the door ahead of me, and I'm met with a very long corridor. It's almost impossibly long, and there's a light leading down to the end, but I can't really see what's down there. Maybe this was some kind of escape hatch or something, just in case there was an emergency, and it probably comes out somewhere else, and I think this is really cool, and decide that I need to investigate it. And this feeling, I can't describe this feeling of being completely drawn into somewhere, almost like it was calling me to go further. I decide that before I go on, I should see what else there is, and I close this door. I then turn around and open another one to my left, and it's the same again, an empty room with 4 doors, which is actually very confusing to me. I continue ahead and I start to feel quite lightheaded. I think maybe the air's not so good down here, and I turn around and come out the one I've just went to, but there's nothing but more doors in here. Starting to panic now, I'm not sure exactly where I am, and I call out for my friend's name, but there's no reply. I do it again and I'm met with silence. I can now hear a scratching on the side of one of the doors that I've just come from. I hesitantly open it thinking it's them, and I'm met with that corridor once more. I feel absolutely drawn in this moment to go further down, and I hear a door close behind me. I turn around and for some reason I'm at peace once again, and I feel like I just have to go on further. I'm completely disorientated at this point and I don't really know how to get back, and I think my way out might be up ahead of me. I decide that I shouldn't go on without my friends and I stare down into that corridor, almost in a trance. I don't know what I was looking for or looking at, but there was something there, and it feels like everything around me goes black and all I can see is the end of that tunnel and another door. I have to know what's in it and I have to investigate it, but maybe, just maybe, I should get the others. I turn around now and come back in again. I go straight and straight but become completely disorientated as I close the second door behind me and there's just more doors. I go to open the one to my left and I realise that it doesn't open. There's another one behind me and it's the same again. Now I think my panic might have set in finally, and I feel my heart beat through my hands. My hands are now shaking as I open another door and it's the same again. But this time, I know that it's going to lead me to the corridor because I can see the light coming down it, and now I'm really confused. I call out once again for my friends and I'm met with silence. And I swear every so often I can hear some kind of footsteps behind me, and that's when everything went black. The next thing I know, I'm being moved but can't see anything, and I'm being slapped with water poured over my head. I'm very disorientated and confused about what's happening, until then I realise it's one of my friends calling out my name saying, "You've got to drink this water," and I suddenly come through. I go to wipe my face and I realise that I'm absolutely drenched in a cold sweat, and they say, "Thank God, we thought we were going to lose you for a second." I can then see the car just up ahead and I feel very weak, almost like I can't move. I keep on seeing black sparks everywhere where I'm not with it. They hold the water to my mouth and say, "You've got a drink," and I nod and start drinking water like I've never drank before. I say what happened and they said, "We couldn't find you for hours. We were looking for you and getting really worried. Then we realised that the picture was off the frame and investigated it and found the way down that you went. We found you in the very bottom of the stairs, covered in sweat, with some big marks across your arm and on your back." I say, "What marks?" My friend then lifts up my shirt and points, and there's very large scratch marks on my back and on the backs of my arms. I can't believe it. I say, "How does this happen? What happened to me?" And they say, "We don't know. I told them I was screaming out for you guys, but you didn't reply." My friends then look at each other and say, "We didn't hear a thing. We just thought you fell over and got hurt." And now the three of us lock eyes. Without saying anything, my friend quickly gets onto the ignition and floors it, and we slowly speed out of there. As we quickly drive away, I then explain to my friends what happened as I'm more with it now, and then they give their story and look very scared. They say that I disappeared for literally hours without making a sound, and they kept calling out for me but couldn't hear anything, just some kind of laughter coming from somewhere else that they thought was me. I said laughing, no, I wasn't laughing whatsoever, and my friend Ben goes very pale suddenly. He then says, "Let's never go back to this place again. I don't know if we're alone in there." And we drive off, making the rest of the trip back until eventually stopping to get some food after 3 or so hours and more water. I pretty much felt fine again after this, and we put it down to me being extremely dehydrated, but we can't make sense of what happened. It doesn't make sense how I got lost, so lost down there. We agreed that something was completely wrong and that we vowed never to go back there again to explore it. Now, I don't know whether this house was designed like the Winchester Mystery House and some crazy person made it really confusing, but I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how I got so lost with such a simple thing to do, or why I felt so drawn down there, and I'm sure something was down there with me. One of my friends later on decided to go back with some of his other friends just to confirm that the place was actually there, but they could never find it. The scariest part for me is not knowing what happened to me, or how I got all of them scratches on my back, or what was at the end of that tunnel. Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support my channel, or if you want early access to my stories, and make sure that you check out my podcast too in the description below. I have a quick message before the stories start, so if you'd like to listen to the stories and go straight to them, there's a timestamp in the description below. So for today I'd like to share this. When things go wrong, it can be really easy to lose sight of what you're doing and your motivation. During these times, it's really important that you take control of your mind, because it's very, very easy for your mind to turn against you and make things worse. And like I've said before, oftentimes things aren't as bad as they seem. If you can't control your mind, then it's going to be a lot harder to control other things. So if you can, take time to calm yourself down and control your thoughts and start to think positive and talk to yourself positively in your head. And again, if times are going rough, remember that sometimes you just have to ride out the bad patches and just keep going. And it may be difficult and you might not be able to see the objective in your current situation or where you'd like to go, but trust me, it's there. You just need to stay positive and keep at it. And don't push yourself too hard. It's okay to have days off and just to rest and do the things you enjoy. I think when it comes to people's mental health, often they go too hard at trying to get better sometimes, and they end up feeling down if they don't get the results they want, i.e. a bad day. But don't worry, it's completely normal and a part of it. And again, remember, if you're really struggling or stressed out, for example with anxiety, it's important to think of, are there any other things that are making me cause this that might not be normal? Like if you're constantly very anxious going out meeting people and going outside generally, then you might have social anxiety or something similar. And with the right help, you can completely turn it around. Sometimes it's just important to know what's out there and what could be wrong to get the help first. Because I know some people too might be scared of any kind of description of something they might potentially have, or automatically assume they can't possibly have it. But remember, that's the wrong mindset. And if something is wrong, there's definitely ways to get better with it. So I hope that can make a difference, and I hope everyone enjoys the stories. I'll speak to you all soon. So, I worked as a camp counselor during my college years. Now, several years before, stories of things like skinwalkers become culturally commonplace. Well, certainly before I'd heard of them. Now, one year, we had a night hike activity with story stations. My station had me by myself on a cliff that overlooks a river, and about halfway through the hike, I was generally the furthest from the other staff at any given time, but because I was in charge of the nature programs, I knew the woods like the back of my hand. I wasn't frightened in the least. Unless there was a recent rain, I could usually get to and from my station without a light. There was another activity where the kids would lead me blindfolded somewhere and I would lead them back. still blindfolded, I know those woods and those trails. The program staff / storytellers would get a notice to turn off our radios before the first group started the trail. After that, it was dead silent in the dark woods until the first group got there. Since I was far enough, I would usually be 15 to 20 minutes before the first group come in. So one night I'm up there, waiting, at this steep cliff, and I hear about 2 feet behind me some kind of kid's voice, which sounds like it's about maybe 10 feet away now, saying my name, clear as day. Now it might not seem very strange to hear a kid saying your name at a camp, but think you're alone, and it's important here that we use nicknames for each other for safety reasons, and not a single child would actually know my first name. The staff did, but they were all at least 50 or 60 yards away, and this was very much a child's voice. It was also coming from what should have been mid-air. It scared me so bad that I had to leave my station and get closer to the next one so I could at least talk to her in the darkness. Over the course of the summer, almost all of the program staff had similar experiences during the night hikes, until finally we scrapped the activity because nobody wanted to be there alone without radios again. Now, let me preface this by explaining that I'm not claiming this was any particular phenomenon. I'm telling you exactly what happened as it happened. No exaggeration or lying of any kind onto what happened. Now, 20 years ago, my older brother and I, who was 19 and 15 at the time respectively, were working on a landscaping job in northern Arizona. So we had gotten off work at the site around 7 PM, hopped into the truck and started the 45-minute commute home. On my way back, there is a dirt road that leads about 20 miles into the desert. It's there mainly to take dirt bikes out or go four-wheeling, etc. But we would use it as it's a good spot to stop and just smoke. So we drive for a couple of miles and park in between these 2 hills that hide the truck and us pretty well. We've done this about 30 times up to that point, but never again. Now we stop and I commence a ritual. He was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening until I heard his voice change saying, "Did you hear that?" We both listen and hear a high-pitched, tiny sound for a split second, then suddenly silence. The desert is actually pretty loud at night. I remembered realizing that the sound is gone suddenly. As we sat there for maybe 5 seconds, my brother gasps and starts to truck and floors it. We go absolutely flying out of there, and I'm asking what happened, but he doesn't say anything. We hit the street, and the lights of a passing car show his face. He's pale and completely wide-eyed and mouth open. I got scared seeing him like this and just wondered what had happened. He finally stopped at a McDonald's parking lot and then we got into town. He starts crying. I pat him on the shoulder and say, "Are you okay?" Then he says, "Remember what, man? We're in the desert for like 5 minutes before you went flying out like a crazy person." He then starts sobbing. He said it had me and he couldn't do anything. He said it took me. At this point I started putting some things together. It was quiet out. No cars. Looked at one of those billboard clocks and saw it was 11:11 PM. My brother told me something had grabbed me through my passenger side window. He had went for his pistol when he suddenly realized he was frozen and couldn't move, and that he knew if he didn't move and get us out of there that we would die right then. He said he felt it in his heart to be true. He then said that he saw this thing which is very tall, thin with huge black eyes. He doesn't remember much else about it, just tall and thin with black eyes that are massive. He sat frozen in absolute terror for hours while the thing disappeared with me into the desert. Then, apparently, I suddenly appeared in the truck and he gunned it out of there. Over the years I've spoken to him about it twice and he hates the fact I mention it. No, I'm not a forest or park ranger, but I hunt. Now, when I say hunt, I don't mean sit down in some tree stand. I mean, I'm the guy going out hunting by walking over the entire park with enough on my back to let me sleep at night sort of comfortably, but little enough that I'm not dragging my 150 pounds of yummy out of the woods. Alright, so I'm hunting a fairly large forest somewhere in the northeast corridor of the US. It's not uncommon to run into other people at the edges of the woods. It's fairly uncommon to run into people in the middle of the woods, however, even if it's during the hunting season, unless that is that you're on the trails, which I wasn't. It's decently common to run into ruins of buildings from the 1800s. I happened to be hunting a new valley I was pretty sure had a crossing on it to set the view. I'm basically sitting at the top of a very steep shell, which is actually on the side looking down into a valley with a creek running through it. Approaching this plateau, there's a knife edge that runs up and down the ridge, so it's difficult to get here unless you're extremely determined, drunk or foolish without actually walking up and down the edge. Getting up here creates quite a lot of noise too from stone sliding on stones, which means that I need to sit up here for an hour to let things settle back down after I made my ascent. It's really difficult, and I left my day pack at the bottom under a pine tree and only had a rifle, binoculars, water and an energy bar. I'm up here for about 3 hours, glassing this little area of a stream, looking for something to cross it, and see nothing but squirrels and the birds, and I finally decide to start glassing the opposite hill out of sheer boredom. I am 90% sure I chose a poor spot and wasted an afternoon looking at nothing. Such is hunting. It's got really interesting days, and it's got really boring days, and this is why it's called hunting and not shooting. Now when I'm screwing around with the binoculars focus, I catch something which almost looks like a person, if they were wearing dark clothes and approximately 4 feet tall. Now 99% of the time, day hikers just pass by without realizing I'm here even with the blaze orange requirements, or this person must have just pretended they didn't see me, but you'd be amazed how many times somebody has almost walked straight through my strand. Anyway, this person wasn't moving, which makes me start to think that I'm wrong. I'm just standing there, behind the cover of some low scrub brush and tree branches, and I would have missed it if it wasn't for the colour. I zoom out a bit and realise I'm not looking at a person, but it's actually a collapsed cabin. And I was looking at where the door would be, except it really looks like a person, and cabins aren't blue. I move the zoom back onto the door and I play with the focus for about 5 minutes, and I can't get the person to come back. In fact, the cabin door now has some light from the setting sun visible through the holes in the walls and roof. Whatever 4 foot tall thing I was looking at's moved. Teenagers, right? I thought to myself. Then I realised something else. I can still hear birds and squirrels and all the other things in the woods that would typically go quiet when they notice something, which means they haven't realised I'm here, but also that means that they didn't notice whatever was in the cabin door a short while ago. Now I'm doing my very best to stay as quiet as I can. I would have expected everything in the woods to have gone for cover with a teenager crashing through the brush, but the noise almost made the situation worse. There was stuff moving in the brush now. The problem was the stuff was moving around in the brush. I started to think that maybe it's a trick of the light, since the sun is setting, and it was getting to the part of the day when the tree stumps look like this. I knew I would have to move soon and figured I might as well pack it up since I still had to get down off that shell and back to the pine tree where I had planned to throw a tarp and sleep. At this time, I realised it wasn't dark per se, but it was overcast now. Again, the creepy experience isn't that there's something obviously wrong, it's that everything is so completely normal from what I expected where I was alone. About this time, a fog rolled into the valley with the combination of overcast weather conditions, sunset, and a ground fog coming up in the wet. There was low valley which had signalled it was time to leave. I checked my safety, put the caps on my glass and reached up to take down my orange flag. The moment I grabbed the flag, dread come over me. That's the only way I can describe it. The woods went from animals going home to sleep to full on, you're in a bad situation here. The movement had attracted what I can only describe as 1,000 invisible eyes, which all turned in unison to notice me. Ever wonder what a deer in headlights feels like? This is it. Then I hear children. I heard children laughing. Not teenagers, not adults, not women, but full-on 5-year-olds laughing like they caught a firefly. I had hiked in 5 miles from the previous day through the woods and put down 2 more today. When I woke up to get to this spot, I distinctly heard children laughing during what I can only describe as the creepiest moment of my life, knowing I'm completely unoccupied having standed there for at least 4 hours or so. I'm pretty sure my feet only touched the shell 3 times getting down from the knife edge, and so it made a ton of noise in doing so. At this point I really don't care. I grabbed my pack and flashlight and absolutely full on rocked it to the next hilltop. I killed my light halfway up the hill, then went to the top of the hill where I threw down the tarp and unrolled my foam, and there I sat all night watching the hill I come from. Now deep in the backwoods, in the backcountry of Montana, my mum was basically hiking up a mountain to get a crystal dig site. She got separated from her group near the end of the trail and was the first to reach the top of the mountain. As she stood on the trail, she saw what she described as a 4-foot by 6-foot black piece of silk whipping through the trees, hovering about 8 feet from the ground. She was startled but not afraid, and she sensed that the thing was aware of her presence and was moving as quickly as it could away from her. She said it was like an Ewok moving from Star Wars. This occurred in 2017, and ever since my mum has posted countless places online asking has anybody else ever seen this, and nobody else seems to have. So I'm a park warden. I basically spend most of my shifts alone, working 5:30 to 2:30 AM in the Canadian wilderness. We have around 300 or so campsites, and a handful of beaches and the infrastructure that goes with them like showers, etc. It just happens that my park is closed for the winter, which are standard in Canada. There can be feet upon feet of snow and blistering cold, so there's no staff in the park from mid-October to early April. Years ago, a man unfortunately decided to end it all by the river on one of the beaches in November, and nobody actually found him until spring melt. This beach is at the farthest northern point of the park and is pretty isolated, but as it has a beach, it requires at least 1 patrol an evening. I was just down in the showers at that Pacific beach around 7 PM on a very overcast day, so no sun to create shadows. I was checking the supplies in the first aid kit and signing off on fire extinguishers. The weather was blah, so there's no campers out or patrols anywhere near the beach, and the parking lot was empty except for my cruiser. All of a sudden, a feeling of intense panic washed over me and I booked it to the cruiser. I get in and slam the door, and a few breaths in and wait for the feeling to pass. After a minute or 2, I get back to business, but this time I'm doing so in my locked car. Now by this time, I start filling out blinders and work logs, and suddenly, a huge dark shape moves across my driver's side window, and I scream and jump back. My immediate thought was that somebody had been lurking and was about to try and open the door. Sure enough, I open the door and it's empty, not a soul around. You can bet to God that I left any and all future maintenance tasks in that neck of the park to be done by the day shift. I floored it out of there. Now maybe it's not the scariest or most shocking story that I've shared, but it really rattled me to the core, and I know I saw something that day, and it still shakes me even now. Now this story really happened over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mum and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit my friends, being allowed to drive over on my own for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m, but if I was running late for any reason whatsoever, then I had to phone and call my parents, but I would need to find a payphone to do so. That night, wrapped around me and my 71 Chevy pickup, as there was no street lights or any houses for most of the way home. As I pulled up to the first of two stop signs, I could see an older sedan stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man in his 30s to 40s started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing some assistance or anything to stranded people was pretty common. Now people rapidly go into severe problems by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, and not realizing that it's a desert and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway for help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he come abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could then see another man in the passenger seat, as this was before anybody I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead, and I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and said, "Can I help him out?" I said to him, "Is it a stick shift?" Which it was, so I said, was he familiar with push starting? He said yes, so I agreed to, gently as I could, push the car with my truck while the engine tries to tick over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that's having battery or starter issues. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try and push the car physically. Pushing the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things started going south. They get out and thank me. They then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them, but I decline. They pull off to the side of the road and I continue on my way. Only then they begin following. So here I am. It's 09:50. I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends to begin with. Then these drunk, creepy older guys started following me on a road without any man-made lights except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I started to think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I know gave me a couple turn-offs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, God, so I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop back around and head to the station, and they follow again, so at least I know they are following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart's pounding. I decide to try and lose them. I pull the car to the side of the road, and I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate and floor it. My wheels dig into the rock and a puff dirt comes up behind me, which is basically a cloud. With the lead way, I'm heading towards a gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showering the lights from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what had happened and why I was running late. My stepdad then said speak to the worker there and try and get directions back. And luckily they gave me some directions and I made it home okay that night. Now, I'm not really a park ranger, but an environmental educator at a nature preserve, so I spend a lot of time outdoors, and it's something I've done often in isolated areas. There's one particular area of the park that I try not to take the group of kids anymore. Now once in a while we have to go through that trail since it's a shortcut to the kayak launch, and when it's about 95 degrees out, you're ready for anything to make your trip shorter. When I started there, one of the first things that I did was familiarize myself with all the areas of preserve. So I spent a lot of time hiking through all of the trails, even the rarely used ones, since I have to know my way around to navigate groups or go rescue someone if they get lost, which happens. Now one part of the preserve is an old homestead site of a now abandoned pineapple plantation. It was settled in the 1890s. We don't know much about the family beyond the name and the approximate year they settled there, and the approximate year the homestead was abandoned. Now this is in southern Florida, and there are thousands of similarly abandoned homestead sites. The early settlers of that area had to be tough as nails. This was pre-railroad area, and the nearest town was about 5 miles through what would have been wilderness at the time with no real roads. So these guys are on their own in a land absolutely bursting with mosquitoes, panthers, bears, and bad water. Water table is high and fresh water can easily be contaminated by salt water nearby. In other words, the early homesteaders were pretty tough because that's the only way they'd survive. There is a narrow trail though that was once a homestead site. Now on one of my first days, I decided to trek through there. I got about half a mile in when I start to get weird vibes. Now I've always been relatively sensitive to my surroundings and kind of have a good touch if something's off really. I guess it's something you just develop in time of being out in the woods and whatnot, or isolated areas, but if something's not right, it probably means that your instincts are picking up on something you should pay attention to. Usually this means your brain is picking up on minute movements on the ground that indicate an unfriendly snake may be nearby or another animal that you don't want to confront. While the panthers are nearly gone, we've got aggressive wild boars and bobcats that freely roam. So I stopped dead in my tracks and let my mind go quiet, looking around carefully for any warning signs, and there aren't any. And I didn't see any recent tracks, but the bad vibe feeling was still there, and I shrugged it off and kept going. The trail was beginning to get narrower, and the bad vibes kept growing in my gut. I felt I was being watched and followed. Now, this is an isolated area, so the possibility that a person was following me is remote, but possible. I stopped every few meters, but there was no sounds. Actually, none at all, not even birds. I start to sweat and my heart starts to race. One thought that kept echoing in my mind: you are not welcome here. Turn around and go. Well, I thought, just getting jittery from my nerves. I thought I might come to a bend and the trail could stop. Now this is almost what happened when I felt this. My feet would go no further. In my mind, the phrase got louder and louder that I'm not welcome here. I then hear a crash behind me, but when I turn to investigate, there's no one there. No animal, human, nothing. The vegetation was sparse enough that I would have been able to see something, so I turned around and left. I put it down to nerves or me being a wimp or something and sort of forgot about it. About a month later, I'm taking a campground through the kayak launch where our kayaks are. I decided to take the kids through the narrow trail to save us about 10 minutes. We get to the same bend of trail and the kids have gone silent. These are 9-year-olds in summer camp. They are not silent, they're never silent. I look behind me to one kid who looks as though he's scared, terrified. I don't like it here. Why not? He looked at me and said, we shouldn't be here. Now I couldn't turn around at this point, so we hustled to the kayak launch and all was well, but we're a little on edge. I took another group through the trail a week later, and again, the kids are silent at that bend in the trail. For that whole summer, whoever I took to the shortcut would go silent and get the bad vibes. Now, I try not to go down that stretch of trail anymore if I can help it. Obviously, this is nothing more than a gut feeling, but it's not a lonely one. It's shared by many others who have no idea about things here. Now, I don't know if it's the spirit of whatever Homestead was there, but it's hard to describe, and there's definitely something wrong there. I really can't explain this. I only worked as a park ranger for 1 year, but I had an experience I'd like to share. I was on patrol one day, just doing my usual business, not too far away from the ranger station. I'd only been doing the job for about 3 months, so really not too long, and everything was completely normal. Now, usually weird things can happen to me, but never really anything that I couldn't explain. So I felt fairly confident during this time. I had a couple of weird things to deal with, like people that thought they were missing and stuff, but it was basically just hikers that had got lost, and I had no issue helping them back. One of the big dangers while you're in a park like this one, a national park, is you can get dehydrated very easily and not really realise it. So it's important that you always have water, and I always had water with me. The only annoying thing that ever really happened was I managed to burst my camel pack and it leaked all down my back. At the time I was terrified because I thought I was bleeding, but this was a different story and not what happened on one particular day. So I'm on my patrol like normal and I feel fairly confident. I haven't done the job for too long, but I seem to be picking up lots of different things, and all of the other rangers at work here are very helpful and friendly. Now I have to patrol a certain area and I get to the first checkpoint. When I get to the checkpoint, I can hear music playing. It sounds very faint, but I check my phone quickly, to which makes me realise that there's nothing playing from my phone. I quickly feel around in my other pockets thinking maybe I've got someone else's phone by mistake, but there's nothing. I then throw the pack on the ground and I realise it's not coming from me, so that raises the next question: where is it coming from? I remain still for a moment and I can hear an old music box being played. Now it's really weird. It sounds relatively powerful but kind of far away, but I really can't tell the direction. This is really bizarre and like nothing I've ever experienced before. I managed to convince myself that maybe somebody had left one out here and I should try and find it. I managed to eventually coordinate roughly where the sound should be coming from, and it's in the direction I need to go regardless, so I head off. While I'm walking, I realise that something just feels different now. Not like I'm in danger, but almost like I am out of my body, if that makes sense, like I've gone into autopilot. I walk for a good 5 minutes and realise that the sound hasn't stopped. It's really strange. I look up and I can see some kind of strange white light just coming through the tree line up where I think the sound is coming from. It's weird because it kind of looks like sunlight but too bright and white to be that. And it's actually hurting my eyes. Now it's strange because this seems to move off, completely unnatural to sunlight or other things that should be here. And I knew it was real because it was so bright that it kind of left the trail with my vision as like a green colour. You know, if you ever catch a reflection or laser in your eye, it kind of burns for a few seconds, just like that. So I was certain something was there. So I continue after whatever this was. Now the sound continues and continues, and I don't ever seem to get closer to it. I literally took off half my clothes at one point just to check there wasn't anything on me, because that would be absolutely hilarious if it was on me, but there wasn't anything. And the sound seems to vanish and all is normal. So I ended up finishing my shift for the rest of the day and heading into the cabins where I was actually sleeping. Now, I managed to forget about what I heard that day. However, halfway through the night, I hear that same sound again. Convinced I was dreaming, I rub my eyes, and then the adrenaline hits me and wakes me up. That wasn't coming from my head. There was the sound again. I quickly get up and run to the window, just in time to see some kind of light just off in the porch. It's really bizarre. Nothing should be around now, and we don't have any lights on where we're sleeping. Thinking maybe it's one of the other rangers, I quickly go over to the radio and wake up my buddy in the next one over. I say, "Did you see that?" My buddy's very confused, and from the tone of his voice I can tell that he's just woken up, and I say, "Give me 1 minute," and I go outside. As I go outside, I can't believe what I see. There's a very small, ancient looking music box just sitting on the porch, still playing its song, just like before. Now, confused out of my mind, and probably just being relatively delirious from waking up, I go off to investigate what the light is, which I know is very stupid. I look around and I can't seem to find anything, and then I can see it again, just illuminating some of the trees, moving at a slow pace, and I follow after it. Now, when I sprint after this thing, it doesn't pick up pace, it just seems to be at the exact same speed and distance to me. It's really hard to explain, but it's weird. I thought maybe it was some kind of hiker out of their mind that was playing tricks on me, but every time I seem to get closer to this thing, it just kind of vanishes through the trees, and what's really bizarre is the way it moves. It doesn't make sense how it kind of drifts through the trees. Now my common sense kicks in. The next thing I realise is that I have to turn around and immediately start sprinting in the opposite direction. After about a good 4.5 minutes of running, I make it back and my other ranger friend is there with a coffee. He says, "What were you doing?" I explain what happened and he looks at me very confused. I then point off in the distance and he goes very pale. I say, "What's wrong?" and he says, "Do you see that light?" I say, "Yeah, I just chased it." He said, "I've seen this before," and he quickly goes inside and tells me to follow. He slams the door behind and turns on all the lights in his cabin. He then tells me that he's seen this light before, and he says to me, "Did you hear the music?" At this point, the penny dropped and I feel very scared. I say, "Yeah, I did, that's why I investigated. I thought you put the music box out there." He then looks at me and says, "No, of course I didn't, I was asleep." And now the fear takes over. He then tells me that he's seen the exact same thing 2 or 3 times before over the last 6 months and he still has no idea what it was. We then realise that the music box should still be outside, and we quickly open the door and head out again to investigate. We look to the exact spot where it was before, and it's not there. I say, no, this can't be possible, it was literally right there on the porch." And my friend looks at me and says, "Don't worry." I start frantically looking around and I can't find it anywhere, and my friend can't either. We ended up staying up for another 2 hours just trying to find this box thing, but we can't find it, and there's no more music. We both looked off into the woods and we can't see any more light now. We decided that we should just stay in one person's cabin for safety reasons, and we start sharing ideas of what this thing could have been. I'd hate to admit it, but I kind of think it was some kind of alien, I tell my friend, and he's leaning more towards the fact it could be something more normal, but it doesn't make sense. There's no reason that it should have been so bright, or bright enough to have hurt my eyes, but why would it have been playing the music box? It doesn't really make sense. Neither of us can account for where that music box gone, and we decided it couldn't have possibly been anybody else because we're the only guys out here, and of course we would have seen or heard them, but how could anybody be this far out? How would they have possibly known their way around the tall trees, and how could they have moved so quickly without disturbing any of the ground? That's the weirdest part for me. I don't know whether somebody or a group of people followed me out there and they had some kind of really bright lantern or something, but it just doesn't make sense to me. The entire situation was just off, and that night is actually what made me change careers. Mind you, I couldn't do it as quick as I wanted. I still had about another 10 months left in the tank before I was able to actually leave, but I requested to leave that area and thankfully it was granted. I never did go back to those cabins, and I never really spoke to that friend much afterwards, so I don't know what else happened. One thing I do know is that there's something out there in those woods that shouldn't be there, and for as long as I live, I'm never gonna forget that song and that light that burnt my eyes. It's about 8 PM last night. I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our late 20s, neither of us drive. Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is the Australian version of an Oyster card. So walking, that's our only option. It's summer over here, so it was fairly well lit, and we're both walking down the main roads and not too concerned. When we finally arrive at this cafe and sit down, now I was paying with my credit card, and sure enough, it was cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back from the counter, so I just gestured her to stay put and guard while I went to get the cash out. This is my home suburb, so I know there's ATMs around, and my best bet is a gas station about a block away. Now I'm doing a light jog so I don't keep Sally waiting, when a balding sweaty guy, probably in his late 40s with a tank top and no shoes, comes facing behind me as I pass the corner of the block. He walked for about 100 meters. I really don't think much of it. The gas station was the next building along, and it seemed like he'd just come out of a nice suburban house along the street, and it's not the witching hour, so I just assume he's going to the gas station as I am. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered this tiny convenience store, nor did he follow me in. In my peripheral vision, I saw him walk past the door and out of sight. I look around for an ATM that they have inside sometimes. No luck. So I go up to this man in his late 30s, at the desk, reluctantly asking if they do a cash out. He smiles and says of course, saying who's with you. I have no idea who he's talking about at first, but he then points to the man from earlier, pacing around outside the store. Keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't going back and forth just outside the door. He was just drifting in space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps, to the storefront seemingly aimlessly. Maybe he's on drugs. I tell the clerk no, not thinking much of it, and he says, he was staring at you before, and I thought maybe he's your father. I laugh it off. I wasn't concerned at all. He was still ambling around outside. I couldn't imagine him having a fixed gaze on anything. I thank the clerk for the cash, but before I turn away he says, just wait and see if he leaves. We wait for a few minutes in silence, and the guy begins to pace back and forth directly against the front wall of the store, looking straight ahead, but never in. It still looked like the man was just a drug addict, and seemed harmless. Not once did I catch his gaze, so I figure it's safe to slip out, where it's starting to become dusk and kind of bright. Sally was texting me, where are you? I thanked the guy at the desk again for his concern, assure him that I don't know the guy and am not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store. The clerk asks if I want him to walk out with me. I say that it should be alright, and begin walking away from the block. As I leave the store though, the drifting man stops pacing and makes a beeline for me from the other end of the building. I seriously don't think much of the guy at all up until this point, but now he's powering towards me. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I start to power walk so he doesn't think I'm actively trying to escape him, still trying to convince myself that I'm being paranoid and should be more casual. I don't look behind me to see how close he is. I've reached the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps when I hear the clerk outside. He's yelling at me, "Run!" I make a break for it, looking over my shoulder. He grabbed the man from behind. The balding man isn't even glancing behind him or trying to escape. He's literally just staring at me, running away with this death stare. I kept running until I crossed the road and then turned around, but still standing. The clerk is holding on to the man. The clerk and I are just looking at each other in pure bewilderment, not really knowing what to do. He makes a hand gesture to go and I wave thanks. I go back to Sally and we rush home a complete different way. It's a really weird experience. I'm just thankful that the gas station worker was so kind and caring. When I was younger, I worked at a gas station as an attendant. I was really hoping to do a good job to impress my supervisors, but I had a few things go wrong what made him lose faith in me. One of the scariest moments was a crazy local drove down by the station, hid in the bushes, and literally started shooting the pumps. My boss is convinced he's aiming for me, but it seemed like I was an unintended target, that he was actually trying to shoot the supplies. Paint cans and oil cans suffer the most damage. I can't figure out why on earth he was trying to do this. He is a real nutcase. I was lucky that the whole thing didn't blow up that day. Freaking crazy. This happened about 6 months ago, and it's really been bugging me since. This will be long, but I must set the scene. So my family has a cabin we've had since the 60s, and I've been going there my entire life throughout the years. It's nestled in a little town of less than 2,000, surrounded in vast forest and farmland. You see cows everywhere and stray dogs that let you stroke them. You'll maybe see 30 people in a day if you go into the little town and shops around. Definition of a small country town for sure. Since I spent my entire life there, I know pretty much everyone. All my family knows everyone. Men dressed in western clothes with big jeans and old flannel shirts and belts with big buckles. Women dressed in jeans and tank tops with country factory logos on them. They're all nice enough and keep to themselves. So I'm driving up there one night to meet my parents since they had been gone the night previously to open the cabin for spring. My boyfriend has also flown in so he can finally meet my family up there. I'd been driving until it got dark. About a 2-hour and 10-minute drive from my house, and he had been taken over driving from around 10. There's a little national park close by, about 15 miles of total land. Since I'd fallen asleep and couldn't give directions, he decided to log the address into the GPS. It took him through the back way through the park that I never drive through. So when he woke me up to ask me where the next turn is, since the GPS said he couldn't go either way, it took me a minute to figure out where the hell are we. There were no lights anywhere, and we're the only car for about 15 miles. There's long forest with tall giant trees on either side of the road, with a lonely deer or two in the woods to keep us company. I mentioned switching drivers because I remembered that road, which would lead directly into the intersection that would go through a small community up to the mountain by my cabin. But it was prime. Leave a tow baby on the side of the road and kidnap someone when they check it out territory. It was dark enough that the forest was thick enough that we joked some cult members are probably there. Hell, maybe they are. Needless to say, we decided stopping isn't a good idea. We eventually passed through a small clearing / intersection with a dinky concrete building on the side of the road with one light on, and a car pulled in the slanted gravel ground. My boyfriend drives forward. He then sees that there's two people there. My gut immediately twisted, and I start to feel sick. Sick enough to feel ice cold sweat running through my hair, and my veins now are pumping through to my stomach. You never see people at night here, and it's two teen boys in fact, wearing nice clothes. Night shorts and obnoxiously coloured sport workout clothing, aka very out of place, like something's wrong. They see us coming and walk away from what appears to be an old beat up car, probably from the 1960s, and it's important to note that this was completely gone of any paint and rusting. They smile at us and wave. I don't have a clue who these people are, and I'm starting to hear noises around us. I knew a gas station was right up the road from us. They could have just walked from there, but there's no lights up the road and no reason to be here. The building around us is abandoned, but there's a light on the wall. I'm starting to think these are in on it. They walk out onto the road, almost blocking my boyfriend from going forward, who had to slow down continuously not to hit them. Suddenly the light goes out in the building. They constantly wave their arms and smile at us, saying something that we can't hear. We think about stopping but decide it's stupid to. My boyfriend quickly drove around them, slamming on the gas, trying to calm me down since the whole scene scares the life out of me. Images of getting out of the car and something stranger or worse happening flew through my head. I look behind us and they're suddenly angry, staring at us, not moving an inch, and the light flickers on in the background in the building. Who are those kids? Why were they wearing city clothes? They look too young to be driving. I know it wasn't their car. And who was in the building? We finally made it out and found the intersection we wanted that led to the familiar gas station, and he didn't hesitate when I said I need to drive next. About 10 or so minutes later we get to the cabin and explain what happened, and my parents are terrified. God knows what would have happened if we had stopped and actually got out. I don't like to think of it. A little over a year ago, I worked at a gas station. It was one of those 24/7 ones with a mini mart inside of it, and I worked the evening shift. Now, I saw and dealt with a lot of messed up things in that store, which just led me to roll my eyes when people were doing or saying creepy stuff. Hell, if I had $1 for every time I was threatened with death, I'd be retired now. So one night, I was out in the store restocking shelves when one of the regulars came in and started talking to me. He was a full-blown druggie. He would have been in his 50s, and he was tweaking while sitting on me. By this point, I'm used to weird stuff and ignore it. He said some messed up things to me though, something about what he wanted to do with me. I zoned in and out of what he was saying. It wasn't uncommon for him to ramble about weird acts and other gross things. I tell him that I have to get back behind the counter because my co-worker needs me to make coffee for a customer. He was a bit irritated but said that he would talk to me later and left the shop. After making coffee, I had to restock drinks, but the day team hadn't emptied the trolleys of boxes, so I took out the boxes to the big bin. The bin is located on another side of the store, but there's no cameras, so people inside the store can't see you there. That used to make me nervous, but I had been there longer than some of the people who had come through, and was used to the environment. As I was throwing the boxes in the bin, the tweaking guy from before comes up to me, grabs my arm. I tried to play it off like he's goofing around and laugh and say something like, "Hey, I know you like me, but you can't do that. My husband's gonna get mad." Sounds like I wasn't trying much, but with people like him, it was best to remain friendly. The last time someone was more firm, he got knocked out by a right hook, and I was a lucky girl who got to witness it and call the police. He then gets angry and says, "I told you I was gonna have my way with you." Now, I've stopped smiling and I'm scared. He shoves me against the bin and goes to unbuckle his belt when glass smashed. One of my favourite customers was across the road at a pub and saw him go straight for me, knowing his reputation, knowing something bad was happening. And when he saw what was going on, he smashes a bottle over his head. Cops were called and I don't see him again. As for the guy who saved me, I'd given him free coffee for a month. I refused outright to take out the boxes now. I'm just glad I got off okay and was saved that day. Probably the weirdest thing that happened to me in my life was when I was driving to a gas station one night. Now, I was on a very long road trip at the time, heading from college to home. I literally had to drive hundreds of miles, and I'm in the middle of the backwoods, not seeing cars or buildings for miles. I'm starting to get worried because of how low my gas is running. I'm really thinking that I'm gonna have to tent it out here in the middle of the night or something, the last thing that I want to be doing. And hey, did I forget to mention that I'm terrified of the woods? Just as I'm thinking this, I decide to switch on the radio to try and calm my nerves. Even worse, they're playing ABBA songs. I really don't like ABBA songs, and I continue going. Luckily for me though, I've got the moonlight to help guide me, even though that my headlights aren't doing much to penetrate the woods. We now entering the dangerously low gas territory, and I'm worried, but lo and behold, what do I see? An old gas station up ahead. Ah, thank God, I think to myself. I was getting worried there. I pull into the gas station and stop for a second before getting out. I have a really weird feeling. I know it's quiet where I'm driving, but it's just far too quiet up here. I look around and don't see anyone. There's no one near the counter either, and it looks abandoned almost. I then hear a voice on the intercom. "Yeah, just go pump your gas, we'll help you in a minute," in a horrible raspy old voice. Now the very second that I go to unlock my door, all of the lights shut off. I know it's not a power outage either, but I can still hear the sounds of the intercom not being turned off fully. Needless to say, I turn my engine key. I'm shaking so much I can't even put it into gear. Not to worry, adrenaline takes over, and I speed up to 60 like I've never drove so quick in my life, and don't bother looking back. As I've been driving for about half a minute, I can see lights in the distance behind me. I'm scared to look. Turns out, all of the lights are on again in the gas station. I have no idea what happened that day, or what they were planning to do with me. Things I do know for a fact though is that they purposely turned off the lights and were purposely waiting for someone to come there. And I also know that there was no help or way to find me if anything happened out there.